real fighter for the people. She keeps the videos and
I was reading through like what's going on in Minnesota. It's just crazy. I mean, it there definitely is an argument for, like, get to work.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and say it right now. I was gonna save it for AK and the folks, but I kind of thought that the idea of that I forget her name, the new speaker, being the first Black speaker, was an ace in the hole for the Republican Party. And they should have just held that over the Democrats' head and said, "You're interfering with the first Black or African American or whatever you want to say, first Black woman being the Speaker of the House in Minnesota." And they should have held out. I thought that I'm going to let AK, because this is pretty interesting what happened. I'm not going to get into it because there's a lot of bumpy stuff, and I don't want to screw it up for the guests that are coming in and are going to straighten it out for us. But I will be hitting them with those questions and those topics. Shane is in here, and that's fantastic. Let's throw him a mic, and he can give us the details. He's inside the Capitol as well.
What's Rep Pam's last name? Sorry, I was trying to change.
Altendorf.
Altendorf, that's what it is. Okay.
I'm going to try my best to help you out with these, the co-host duties.
I know you could do it. I have full faith in you.
I haven't done it a lot, but I plan to do less talking and more listening, and so I'll be able to watch the.
It's what's going on. Is it ALTT or
ALT one T?
Okay.
Altendorf.
ATEN.
Yep.
DORF.
Yep.
Got it.
Hey, No Quarter.
Hey, how are you?
I'm okay. How are you?
Good. It's good to hear you.
I'm just getting all the stuff together. I put up, if it was okay, I put it up in the Jumbotron, the article you shared on the power line.
Oh, yeah, fantastic.
I titled it Disaster in Minnesota.
That is something. Shane, you can pop in anytime and chime in. We'd love to hear from you. I know you have a lot to add to this, more than I could ever possibly. So appreciate you coming in, man. It's good to see you.
It's because you were the smart one that sent me a direct text message, so I would see it as soon as I got back from the Capitol.
Yeah, I get it right every once in a while. But
hey, even a broken clock's right twice a day. For the day, yeah, till Monday 3:30.
Fantastic work.
I'm in a ball cap and blue jeans and a sweatshirt. It didn't take me long.
Well, thanks for coming, Shane. Appreciate you. I can't wait to kind of dig into what's been going on up there, and just the in one sense, I'm hopeful because there was some flexing going on.
Well, we'll see who all gets in here. There's a lot I think a lot of people don't know, and that's normal. But even reading what the Dems were putting out today in their messaging, it's not factually true. So, but I don't discredit them for it because they're going to try to appease their base. I think one of the greatest things that speaks volumes is Representative Lee Finke chose to not vote for the speaker role because they obviously all voted for Hortman. We all voted for Dameth, but Lee Finke chose to not vote at all. So there's apparently some inner conflict going on over there.
Yeah, I'm not up to date on that
Space.
at all, Shane. So we look forward to that being part of the conversation. You and Pam and AK are gonna we're gonna rely on you guys to bring it because we've only been picking up a little bit in pieces here and there, and we know it's bumpy. We know it's quite the maze that's going on down there as far as information goes.
If I was
Yeah,
a
did you
oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Walter, did you invite, this is going to sound funny. Did you by chance invite Walter Hudson?
I did.
Okay.
Yeah, if you want to send him an invite, that'd even be better.
Yeah, I'm gonna text him. Just give me a second. He's very well at first at this as well. He's also on the executive board, so he has a little different perspective. Well, you'd think, here we go. Yeah. Oh, I got to go back to your thing first.
Hey, news.
Hello. I actually have a question for Shane. I'll wait till he's done with his texting or whatever he's doing.
Well, first, can we get to Kelly? Kelly was going to say something. What did you have, Kelly?
Oh, I don't know how constituents feel, but I mean, it's ridiculous. They don't show up to their job. You know, that's what they're employed for. If it was a regular job and just didn't show up because I wanted to be a petulant child, I would get fired, you know?
And I would actually argue that that's probably, it was the public pushback that drove this thing harder probably than anything else. That Wednesday, we figured they weren't going to come back until whatever it is, March 11th, 12th, whatever, once they got back to 67. So they were prepared to stay out that long, was what every indication. I mean, there was handful of their members that were quietly speaking that they didn't agree with this. They absolutely hated it. They were the ones that they're in closer, tighter areas, voting wise, percentage wise in their districts, and they must have been getting hit pretty hard. I know the first Wednesday when we first came, that'd be the 15th, there was the chamber dinner, and they were actually ordered not to go, but to my knowledge, at least 6 of them were there. And I spoke to one of them, and that individual was very, very uncomfortable and genuinely pissed off at his caucus. So, and he was pretty sincere about it. I don't agree with him on policy or any sort, but I mean, he was pretty genuine that what they were doing is wrong. And I think it's that whoever started the one website where it showed the accumulating days, accumulating dollars, I think that was very effective because as those numbers kept growing day by day, put a lot more pressure on them, and people realize how much is being spent for them to do this. And I hope that everybody remembers this. If we end up in a special session spending even more money, because special sessions are very expensive to prolong a lot of that stuff. So we'll see how cooperative they are now.
I stand corrected. So thank you for that information.
Okay, I just tried to throw Walter Hudson and Pam Altendorf a mic. It did not go out. Can you try it for me, Kim?
Yep, I'm sending them now. But if you guys request a mic, it's at the bottom left-hand corner. Just click on that.
Once they get pulled in, it looks like Walter's in the speaker, but you know, Pam's got an amazing perspective on the Shakopee race and information. She worked really hard on that. She's kind of your go-to information source for all things on, what is it, 54A or whatever it is. So
yeah, so it's not letting me throw mics. I think that portion of Spaces has been broken for a bit, so she'll have to request it.
Okay, Pam, the microphone over on your bottom left corner. If you click on that, it'll send a request to us, and we'll let you grab a mic.
What time is AK supposed to be in?
Around 7.
Okay.
How you
Central
doing, Mr.
time.
Hudson?
We're going to go with Central Time since this is a Central Time Zone space. So I will defer to Central Time today.
I've been waiting for this day.
Well,
Go ahead.
while we're waiting it. Oh, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, go ahead, News. You could ask Shane your question while we're waiting for everybody to get settled.
Shane, a special election just came up in my district, and I had some people ask me to do it. Bottom line, I filed about, 5 days ago. I filed on the 29th, so about a week now. My website's not going to be up until Tuesday, and the people that asked me to file, I'm going to start sending it to them and all. But what I haven't decided is whether or not I should come out on my X account or just leave that totally separate. I know I've got to create a Facebook account. It seems everyone running is on Facebook. I gave up my Facebook about 5 years ago. Do you have any thoughts on that? Did you even hear me, Shane?
I didn't unmute. Sorry. I said on Facebook, I have like my personal thing. If he's still in, he's going to me if I get this wrong. He is. But then I have a campaign one. It's for rep, and then the other one's the official one, which is and we are kind of very cautious to you don't put official stuff on campaign. You don't put campaign stuff on official one. And on the personal one, I put it where the hell I want to because it has nothing to do with politics, even though it has a lot to do with politics, but it's my own thing. I don't really care. So my Twitter's kind of the same way. It's not my official Twitter page or anything like or whatever profile.
Okay, so I'll leave all mention of that run off of Twitter and maybe create another Twitter for that. I don't know. Anyway, I don't have much time. I've only got 2 months before the election, so I'm going to be doing a heck of a lot of door knocking over the next 2 months.
So where is this and what position is it you're running for?
Oklahoma State House, District 71.
Fabulous.
Well, the good thing about it is instead of just complaining about what they're all signing, and I'm tired of calling them and not having them respond, I'd much rather be there and be very active on that level. And I've got a setup of about, I've made some inroads with a pretty good sized group of people that are spread out all over the state. So once I'm in office, I'll be in a position where I can reach out to them, as I see various bills that I don't understand, if there's something, because we're all doing research on different areas. Some are focusing on school related, some medical related, some Wi-Fi and 5G related. There's groups that are focusing on the different areas. So that's an advantage. I'll be able to reach out to these different ladies in these different groups. And it's mostly the women that are doing a lot of the deep dive research and stuff. There are a few good men in there, but it's mostly the older women.
I'm so proud of you for running, News. That's such exciting. That's great.
Awesome. Hey, everyone. I did make it on. The struggle is real. This is Representative Pam Altendorf, but I figured it out.
Hey, congratulations, Pam. See us at Old Dogs Week. We learn occasional new tricks. I suck at tech too, but boy, once I figure it out, it's not so hard.
Well, this is my official first, what do you call this? Space?
XSpaces.
Yep.
Nice job.
XSpace.
Well, you're going to love it.
Well.
Yeah, Pam, you're going to get hooked. And this is a good place, a good place to do what you do regularly, which is connect the people on the ground with what's happening down there at the Capitol. So we appreciate you coming in.
Well, thanks for inviting me. And yeah, we just I heard Representative Mecklin. He couldn't hear me, but heard him giving a little bit of the synopsis of what's been happening at the Capitol. And we in Minnesota tend to lean on crazy here, so so we
one thing for certain, Pam, and I'm sure you all will agree with. We're well versed here in Minnesota. We're very nimble when it comes to politics, I would say. I think it's a very unique place to be involved in politics on any level, especially if you're a Republican.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I say this all the time. We really are a purple state. And it's not just because we like the Vikings. That's my little joke. But we are a purple state. And what we saw the Democrats do in the last 2 years, bringing us so far left into the deep blue area, I think is very uncomfortable even for a lot of Democrats here.
Well, and I think to Pam's point, if you know, when you get outside of Minnesota, a lot of people consider Minnesota a very blue state. It's just kind of thought to be that way. Like much like California, Oregon, Washington State, what have you, Jersey. But when you look at it, the Democrats control the Senate by one person. It's 33-34, and the House is currently 67 Republicans and 66 Democrats. And depending on who wins this special election, it could be 68 Republicans or it'll be 67-67. That does not constitute a blue state. It's literally 50-50. And even last biennium in the trifecta, they had a 1-seat majority in the Senate and they had a 4-seat majority in the House. So it wasn't like it was a massive tip. It wasn't, like going to Massachusetts or on the blue side or going to Tennessee and the red side where the Republicans have a 75% majority. It's certainly not that way. It's very 50-50 and has been for quite a while.
That's right. I think a lot of people, like I said, even common sense Democrats, moderates, independents would really appreciate it if we could pull it back to the middle and not be living out there on the edge where we don't want to be.
Well, welcome to you, Rep. Pam. And so can we just kind of like for the audience, give a brief synopsis of what's going on there, what's been going on there for the last, week or so?
So ask everyone to like and repost the space as well. So
well, I was going to get to that too, Adam. Please repost the space. It's the little bubble down in the bottom right-hand corner. You click on that, and then you're going to click on the arrows going around in a square.
Okay, let's see if I can do that.
And then you then give it a heart and give it a bookmark.
And Walt, chime in anytime. Appreciate you.
Oh, welcome to Walter too.
I'm glad to be here. Just give me a couple of minutes. I've been just pulled into the driveway and need to get settled in a bit, and then I'll give you guys an update.
Well, while we're waiting, I want to sneak in here real quick. We are streaming this space to X live broadcast, to Rumble, Pilled, Kick, KUX TV, and YouTube. I think I got them all.
Kick. Did you say kick?
Did I say kick? Kick too.
She said kick.
Okay.
At some point, and maybe after AK gets in here because he's into all these different platforms, I would like, if you would, Kimberly or somebody, introduce the America mission, explain who we are and how we roll on this platform specifically, but all the work we've done around the United States. So that'd be great.
For a glorified therapy group? No, I'm just kidding.
So as everybody's kind of getting everything settled in, one of the things that was just said is for the last week or so, that the Democrats actually did this holdout for 23 days. So it's a little bit more than just a week. This actually made what they did in Wisconsin back during the Scott Walker era look like nothing compared to what they did here. So
Wow,
Yeah, this was
23 days. That's whoa. Sorry that I said a week.
3 weeks and
it's
2 days.
yeah, it was a complete Democrat temper tantrum. This was what I looked at. This was a bunch of adults that grew up in an environment that they're used to getting participation trophies, and they wanted their participation trophy, and there was a little bit trouble on that math where Republicans were ahead. We were 67 to 66, and just like as Shane mentioned in the Senate, they're ahead 34 to 33. The Democrats are. They're not power sharing when they're one ahead, but that's what they were asking us to do. They were asking the Republicans in the House to basically do a power share agreement.
And actually, the best part of this to note is it would have been 67-67, which there was going into that, there was a power sharing agreement. Right up until one of their rep-elects was found to have lied and cheated on his affidavit of candidacy, stating that he did in fact live in district, to which a Walz appointed judge ruled that he in fact did not live in district and was ineligible to serve it. So one of their own rep-elect members is what cost them all of this nightmare, to which they then tried to blame the Republicans for.
Yep.
Where's the grace in that? I mean,
Well, they all did have Common Core math. Come on.
Yeah, no, Shane and Pam have outlined it pretty well. Just to kind of take you through the timeline, because I think, first of all, let me start here. This is an unmitigated, unqualified victory for Republicans in Minnesota. Democrats caved entirely. They lost this gambit that they engaged in. And I'm going to, by taking you through the timeline of how this went down, I hope to provide you with the clearest possible understanding of just how true that claim is. So on election night, or the morning after election night, we're sitting here looking at what at the time we all perceived to be a 67-67 tie. Now, under those circumstances, which have not existed since 1979 here in this state, the assumption was that we were going to have to do power sharing. That's where you get this whole power sharing agreement phrase that's been so popular in the discourse over the past several weeks and months. That power sharing negotiation was taking place under the assumption that we were going to be 67-67. And as Shane states, it then came to light due to great work by folks on the Paul Wickstrom campaign in District 40B here in Minnesota. They did yeoman's work providing incontrovertible evidence that the Democrat candidate in that district, Curtis Johnson, did not live there. That resulted in a successful election challenge that determined that Curtis Johnson could not take that seat. Past that point, there was no longer a pending tie. It went from 67-67 to 67-66, making Republicans in the majority. And so right away, the claim from Democrats was, well, we have this agreement. You have to honor the agreement. And it's like, no, the agreement is predicated upon having a tie. We don't have that now because you guys cheated. And by the way, just as an aside, they knew. Ryan Winkler, former Speaker of the House or House Majority Leader, I don't think he was ever the Speaker, former House Majority Leader Ryan Winkler, who remains a Democrat operative here in this state, went on a podcast and disclosed that Jamie Becker Finn, who was the previous incumbent in that district, 40B, a Democrat, was well aware of the fact that Curtis Johnson didn't live in the district, didn't care, endorsed him anyway, and the rest is history. So this is a mess that they created entirely for themselves. And then they try to turn around and pivot and distract from having been caught cheating an election by making everything about this other contested race in Shakopee here in Minnesota, where Brad Tapke was narrowly elected, allegedly. And Pam can get more into those details.
I'm back. I am like, the struggle is for real. Yeah, so thanks, Walter. I know facts matter. And unfortunately, the Minnesota media, the mainstream, I'm so thankful for what's happening on X. And I I feel like free speech is back. And I feel like we're actually getting the word out, and it's such a breath of fresh air that we're able to spread the truth. I think back to 2020, and so many people's voices were silenced, and I think that's a big reason why the 2020 election went the way it was. But the truth is getting out, and it's like it's so nice to see this pushback on the Minnesota media. So, like Walter was saying, I mean, they're trying to do this. Here's the shiny ball that this is about Tapke when cheating has consequences. They clearly cheated in the 40B Roseville race, and it has consequences. And basically, I mean, I don't know how much detail you want, but there's this other Shakopee race here in Minnesota where, just to give you the background, but election night, the 100% is literally showed 100% precincts reporting. The Republican Aaron Paul won by 360 votes, so it wasn't even close. We were all excited, of course. We're watching the results coming in, and then next thing, that whole race was pulled. I mean, it was gone, zeroed out across the board. And we're like, what in the world is going on? And found out that they said, oh, whoopsie, gosh darn it, forgot those absentee ballots. That race was not put back in until close to 3 a.m. in the middle of the night. And then the Democrat was winning by like 14 votes. Now, fast forward, if that's not enough, the county, Scott County, admitted it was like November 27th, so 3 weeks after the election, that 21 ballots were shredded, gone. They lost track of them. And so, 21 ballots gone in a race that's 14 votes apart. That's a big deal. And they try to just gloss over that as if that is not a big deal. And that's what's really getting a lot of people in Minnesota upset about our elections, and the Democrats refusing to address these election integrity issues.
So what happens with the seat for the person that was disqualified? Do you guys
Well-
fill that seat?
No, so
Okay.
that's the other
Well,
beautiful part
Walter,
about this.
Walter, go through what originally happened with the governor, and then what the court decision was beyond that, and then go from start with.
Yeah, so I think the first thing you need to understand is that according to state statute here in Minnesota, when a vacancy occurs as a result of a successful election contest, which is what happened in this case, the statute is very specific as to what is to take place. The governor is to issue a writ for special election 22 days after the start of the legislative session, or 5 days after the House passes a resolution stating that they're not going to contest what the court came up with. And the reason the process looks like that is because constitutionally, the House is under control of its own membership. So even if a court says one way or the other, this is what we think happened in the election, ultimately, the House gets to review the special election contest and is the final arbiter. And so there are really only two scenarios, right? One is 22 days after the start of the legislative session, which was January 14th, or 5 days after a resolution is passed by the House. So when we got to January 14th, the 67 Republicans, we all showed up to be sworn in and get to work. All 66 Democrats boycotted, did not show up under the auspices that they were denying us quorum, and we therefore could not legally or constitutionally organize. Now, at the time, we were operating under our interpretation of the plain reading of both the Constitution and statute, which nonpartisan staff agreed with, that we could, in fact, organize the House with just 67. And so we went ahead and we did that. And we passed a resolution same day saying we weren't going to have a contest, or we weren't going to review the decision by the court. The problem is Governor Tim Walz had already set the date for the special election for January 28th, outside the confines of what statute declares. In other words, he called it too early. And because he called it too early, he got sued by, I believe it was the Republican Party of Minnesota, and other organizations. That lawsuit was successful. The special election that was supposed to take place on January 28th was canceled, And because the governor was supporting the Democrats' boycott of the House, he refused to recognize the resolution that we passed on January 14th. So in other words, he could have called this special election for 40B earlier, but he purposely chose not to in order to maintain the narrative that the House was not duly organized. So now that election is going to take place on March 11th, and we expect that the new member, whoever that is, will end up being sworn in on March 17th. So this is all really complicated, but again, it's the comedy of this is how it's the Democrats continually getting in their own way of having the fastest solution to getting back to potentially electing a replacement for the member who, or for the seat that they lost because they cheated in the election in the first place.
And bear in mind that decision that went against Governor Walz was by the state Supreme Court, which is now a 100% Democrat appointed liberal state Supreme Court. Just like when the one member elect was found to be ineligible was by a Walz appointed judge. So
Right.
That's how bad this was and how egregious it was that they literally they couldn't even the justices couldn't even find a way out of this on behalf of their colleagues because it was that egregious.
Right. Even though I feel like we're boxed in Minnesota, you know, they have complete control. They have the governor, the attorney general, secretary of state, the judges are liberal. The Republicans really have had some wins, and it's exciting to watch, and it's really encouraging our base, and so that's good. We need, you know, we really need the grassroots with us. We need everyone in our party, you know, people that are frustrated. But it's exciting to watch us have these wins, and I kind of equate it to if you're from Minnesota, you basically you're used to. And you're a sports fan. A lot of times our teams, it's difficult being a Minnesota sports fan. A lot of people from Minnesota can relate to that. And you're always thinking like, are we going to miss the field goal or something else going to happen? But it's exciting to see these wins. I'm equating it that, you know, I think we're still nervous, but I feel like the pendulum's swinging, and it's swinging in the right direction, and it's swinging back towards us and the common sense.
I'm from Tampa, so I understand that analogy quite well.
Should we go to Chris real quick? He's got his hand up.
Go for it. Mr. Philby?
Yeah, I apologize for being here late, but unfortunately I was tied up with our federal government. I was doing a little bit of reading before I came in here, so I don't sound like a complete idiot. But what is striking to me is that the Secretary of State has a more significant role in the government of Minnesota than the Speaker of the House. It just blows my mind.
Well, by law, he's supposed to only have a ceremonial type role. He really doesn't have the authority to do what he did. However, again, then we ran up against these liberal judges who ruled differently.
Well, yeah, but not to beat a dead horse here, but our friends on the other side of the aisle, okay, the ones that we like to bitch and complain about all the time. See, they would have run off to an Article 3 court and they would have screamed and complained that their 14th Amendment rights had been violated. some federal judge at the top end of Minnesota in some obscure district to bail them out, or called some dude in Hawaii, you know, in the Ninth Circuit that, you know, is really good at that. But I you know, you I guess you have ended up with about the best situation that you're going to have given your circumstances. You know, unless you can pick off this other seat, which is apparently in a pretty blue district. But you know, but I guess my main point is that these Democrats in Minnesota are vile, nasty people, and you're never going to make headway unless you use their tactics against them. And it doesn't mean that you have to be vile and nasty. It just means that you have to be extremely aggressive and use the tools that are available to you to make their lives miserable. And when they're done being miserable because they have been slapped in the face with the same garbage that you have witnessed yourselves being hit with, then they will either come to their senses and start playing by the rules, or they'll go home, because the public will soon begin to see how ridiculous they are.
Yeah, I think Walt would love to address that. I don't know that there's anybody who really goes after them Democrats the way he does and in the manner that he does. So can you help us out on that one there, Walt?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to pick a spot to start, right? I think the first thing I'll say is Pam and Shane and I just came off of the House floor a little over an hour ago. We had our opening day of session about a month late. We elected Republican Lisa Damath as Speaker of the House. We organized the House. We have supermajority control of a fraud committee that is going to be lighting up the governor for the next 2 years. We have, for the time being, majority control and sole control of all committees, pending the outcome of that 40B race. We all served under the Democrat trifecta over the past 2 years. I've never seen Democrats more miserable than I saw them tonight. And I got to tell you, it was very interesting. It was very interesting because, you know, there's these Democrat operatives who are out there on Twitter right now trying to claim that we caved, which I think is hilarious. Like, what caved from what? Like, we've been showing up every day. You're the ones who finally came in. Clearly, you're the ones who caved. But, you know, trying to spin this as some sort of win for them. The Democrats were like openly mournful in their floor comments tonight. You had Athena Holland standing up to nominate Melissa Hortman for Speaker of the House, all like holding back tears and talking about how much Hortman has had to sacrifice in order to bring us to this moment, not because she wanted to, but because it was the best thing for their caucus and yada, yada. Like, why are you sad if this is a win for you? Why are you sad if we're the ones who caved to you? No, they're sad because they've been defeated. They have been beaten. They have been torn down. I am sick and tired of this Minnesota Republican mentality that is stuck in the presumption of loss and won't take the win, won't take the W. We won. And I'll tell you exactly how.
That's what.
I'll tell you exactly how. So if you look at a timeline, like if you can envision, I know this is an audio format, but if you can envision a timeline where one end of the spectrum starts on November 6th and the other end of the spectrum stretches forward into the future to March 17th, which is when, assuming that the Democrats win in 40B, which is not predetermined, they would get their 67th member. And then you look at today, February 6th, as kind of the apex of the bell curve between those 2 points. On either end of those spectrums, either on November 6th or on March 17th, what we would be looking at as Republicans, assuming the Democrats win this 40B seat, is well and true equal 50-50 power sharing with co-speakers, both Melissa Hortman and Lisa Damath, and co-chairs and co-vice chairs and everything equal and everything shared. And we all got to somehow kumbaya and get along. Compare and contrast. And that's what would have happened on March 17th. And it's what was slated to happen by our understanding of what the reality was on November 6th. Instead, we're here on February 6th. And what do we have? We have an alternate universe where now Lisa Damath is the Speaker of the House with all the powers and privileges that go along with that title. There were very minor concessions made on things like appointments to commissions and boards and all of these things that it's not that they don't matter, but they certainly don't determine what the ultimate law is going to be. They don't control the legislative process. And then there were all these concessions made to what will happen in the event that we get back to 67. But again, that's not predetermined. And regardless of how things go down, Lisa Damath is the speaker for the entire term, 25-26. And we have this fraud committee that the Democrats did not want. You think the Democrats want Republicans getting on House media and catching the eyes of reporters both statewide and nationally every week talking about the $660 million worth of known fraud and uncovering new aspects of fraud that have been enabled by their trifecta control over recent years? No, they didn't want that, but they had to eat it. They had to take their medicine. They had to accept it. They had to cave. We won. And this situation, their gambit actually turned out worse for them with this resolution than it would have if they just would have shown up on the first day.
That's right. Yeah, I love, I mean, Walter, you're 100% right. I was saying they caved, they capitulated, there's no way you can't spin this any other way while the media will try. But when they talk about power share, I was thinking about this the other day. Really what this was they're not wanting to power share because they are so used to being in complete control in Minnesota of just having us locked up in this trifecta. And they're so prideful and so arrogant. When we're talking about this struggle that was happening this last month, it truly was the Democrats not wanting to power share because they didn't want to give up their power. It was them just screaming like children throwing a temper tantrum because they knew they lost power.
Yeah, I mean, you've got, especially with these freshmen from, or second termers now, but the folks who came in alongside you and me, Pam, we were all elected in 2022. And the Democrat freshman class from that year, all they've ever known is total power. They were elected into a trifecta with majority control, and they have never been told no once in their lives. Quite literally, possibly never told no once in their lives by anyone. And now they are being told no. Now they are learning what it means to be held accountable to something. They are learning for the first time what it feels like to walk into those doors and walk those hallowed halls, not holding all the keys to power. And it's going to be a tough lesson for a lot of them. And that's why heads were not hanging particularly high on the other side of the aisle in the House chamber this afternoon. So this is something that should be celebrated. It is something that should be lauded. We should take the victory lap. We should spike the football. We should be very happy that we all of us, not just those of us who are elected House Republicans, but the greater movement within the state and even support we got from outside the state resulted in holding firm, showing Minnesotans who we are. And the other point that I wanted to raise is because I think Chris earlier talked about how, well, if you want to beat these Democrats, you really need to use their tactics. I would argue not. Because you know what their tactics are? They just showed us what their tactics are. And it turns out they don't work. Their tactics, when they had trifecta control, were to shove through a 1,400-page omnibus bill on the last day of session in violation of all their own rules, all the parliamentary rules, and the state constitution itself. That was their tactic. And then the electoral result of that and other things, the substance of the actual policy they passed, was to lose their trifecta. And then they were so arrogant, they were walking with such, effete elitism in their confidence in total power that they ran somebody who they knew, who they had internal knowledge did not live in the district, thinking, we're Minnesota Democrats. We never get caught. We never face any accountability. We'll never be punished. We own everything. Look at, we have all the judges. We have every branch of government. We can do whatever we want. And it didn't work out for them. And then when they had to face, when they were confronted with the possibility of facing consequences for that, what did they do? Well, let's deny quorum. Let's act like petulant children. Let's put forth the narrative. Let's tell a bunch of lies, which there's been nothing but lies since they started to engage in this narrative regarding how all of this works. And what has it resulted in? It's resulted in them getting nothing. They have gotten nothing as a result of the tactics that they've used. Taking the high road, doing things the right way, showing people how to actually govern, how to actually be responsible legislators, does result in victory in the end, but you got to have the patience to commit to it.
Yeah, and Walter, I think that's one of the hardest things is, when you're hearing from the base, the one thing I've learned myself, I'm not a patient person, shocker, right? But someone said to me, it's like the wheels of government turn slowly, and really that's the way it should be. What we saw in the last 2 years in Minnesota was an abnormally fast turning of the wheels of government and really radical left legislation being forced on our state. And that's not how it's supposed to go. It's supposed to be a slower process so that we are working together. And I would say coming in as a freshman, 2 years ago, that was one of the most disappointing things that I saw was there was literally absolutely no working together with the minority party, no accepting amendment, no nothing. And so, like you said, Walter, they have been in complete control. They have gotten their way. They basically mocked us. If we had a common sense amendment there was so many amendments that even I thought most Democrats would be like, hey, why don't you take that one? That would be a good amendment to take. The Democrats just, almost mockingly would not take a single amendment because then it might take a little bit longer. They'd have to rewrite a bill or something like that. So they thumbed their noses at everybody for the last 2 years. And I know we're not supposed to, be happy in other people's misery. But truly watching them today, they were defeated. And it was well deserved in the way and the manner that they have acted, not just to the Republican Party, but to all of Minnesotans, like how they have acted so recklessly in the last 2 years.
You are 100% correct, Pam. I'm just going to jump in here real quick, and we'll get to some hands here in a second. We have some questions down there. But I wanted to first commend, I've actually talked to a couple of legislators. They would go down and park in front of that Capitol, and they would just dread going in there. I commend you folks for just grinding it out in a way that I couldn't even imagine, just knowing that you were going in there to just take a butt kicking every day because there was nothing you could do. except for just listen to their garbage all the time and let them walk the way they walk and talk the way they want to talk. So I just wanted to throw that in there, commend you all for that, because I know that was grueling. I just can't imagine it. So just wanted to get that quick appreciation in there for you. Jen is here. She's the founder of America Mission, and I just wanted to acknowledge her and America Mission, and thank you for setting this, helping me set this this space up and get Minnesota in here to share some of this this experience that if you ever run into it anywhere else, you'll be familiar with it. And if you ever need any, advice on or help on trying to figure these things out when you're in your own battles in your own states, Minnesota is a good go-to place. It's good to know these people, follow them, and keep in touch. But I just wanted Chris. I want to introduce Chris as a member of America Mission. I think that at some point, I'd like to see the flag up there, just to introduce the folks from the family, and just reset the space whenever you're ready, Kimberly.
Sure. Thanks, Walter. Yeah, so I appreciate everybody being here. Thank you so much. Please repost the space. It's the bottom right-hand corner. Click on the little chat bubble and then click on the arrows going around in a square. Give it a heart, give it a bookmark. We are happy to have our fellow Minnesotans in here. We've been paying attention to your state politics since Walter came onto the team at the very beginning. So I'm excited that you guys did get a win. And I'm really interested to, hear more about what's going on there. And then we also have on the stage Miss Kelly. She does all of our research and handles our social media and streaming and basically keeps us all in line. We got a couple of other people down in the audience. We've got Adam Karabachi. He runs our Saturday spaces and fills in whenever we have emergencies. And he's our tech guy. He likes to do videos, all that good stuff. We got Michael Hawkins, who also helps us out and does streaming. So we got quite a few of our team members in here. What America Mission does, we're a grassroots movement. We got together 2.5 years ago now. We're here to teach people how to be good citizens. Obviously not in the sense of your personal life, but, civics, what to do, how to get involved, how to, exercise your rights, know your rights. So we have civic spaces on Tuesday nights at 7 Eastern. Where right now we just finished up Article 3 of the Constitution. We're going to be going through the rest of that, the Bill of Rights. We're going to go through the Federalist Papers, the Anti-Federalist Papers. So all of the founding documents, it's important that we teach each other these things so that we don't wind up in the place that we have been for the last 12 years. So that's a little bit about us.
And Kimberly, I'd also ask that somebody just explain and give some information on the successes of America Mission, the bills that we've been able to get tabled, and the work that we've done across Washington, and how we've had folks from Washington come into spaces and work with us hand in hand to get things moved or get things stopped.
Jen, do you want to do that, or you want me to do it? All right, I guess I'll do it. So yes, we have, through talking about different legislation and making people aware of it, we were instrumental in helping to stop the Restrict Act, the Digital Platform Act, which both were like very Orwellian bills that would have taken away a lot of our rights, similar to what the Patriot Act did, but on a digital level. We also have helped 3 times stop the Maine legislator who keeps trying to do all of these transgender children trafficking bills. The latest one was they tried to put in a school medical center, so, or facility, so that they're trying to take away parents' rights, to make the medical decisions for children. These clinics were going to be able to do things to children and without parents' consent. So that's something that we've been working with Courage as a Habit on. A few other things. We just had Patriot Awards in DC during the inauguration, where we were able to give awards away to Vivek, Steve Bannon, John Voight, Helen Competore, O'Keefe, James O'Keefe, and Matt Boyle from Breitbart. Who else?
Scott Pressler was down there.
That's right. So that was a really great event. We had so much fun getting to meet everybody in person. All right, let's get to the hands. Let's go to Justin, and then we'll go to Tom, and then Chris, and then Jay Sears.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having this space, and wanted to say hi to the representatives here that we have. I was with them guys on the real press conference, which looks like it worked. So I just want to make a comment. Well, we're still doing it. So our BPOU right now is collecting signatures tonight at the library. I'll be manning some hours tomorrow at the library, and we're still going to file Monday. So we're still going to do the recall because we feel that, we still need to put that pressure on the Democrats that, we can't pull these kinds of stunts without at least, getting a little pressure. I'm not sure how far it'll go, but it'll be interesting. I got one question for the representatives, Altendorf and Hudson. I think the base is a little, this was some good wins, right? Let's not ignore the fact that we got the fraud committee. I think that's one of the biggest things you guys could have achieved here this year, and the speaker. My question is that it's still the tab key thing is bugging a lot of people, okay? Because that election was just an actual disaster. Chain of custody, all kinds of issues, duplicate votes that they fixed. Supposedly, they say data that's missing, data that hasn't been released to, I think Representative Altendorf was waiting on some data. I'm not sure if she did receive that, but my question, I think we're kind of feeling a little bit down about that, because are we going to have any recourse at this point as citizens to still have an investigation on that election? Because that election is really something that we can't have happen again. And that's my main question I wanted to ask about the tab key situation. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks I just want to say a big thank you for you for working on that recall, and for all the people across Minnesota. The Minnesota GOP, I give them a lot of credit for stepping up and leading on that. I think that's a big reason why we saw this complete capitulation, is that their members were feeling the pressure. And I'm glad to hear that you're going forward with it. And I think it's important. And here's why, because we need to continue to move the needle. And instead of just hearing from Republicans 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks before an election, let's change that. And let's be messaging right now. Imagine over this next 2-year period, you're going to doors, or however you're collecting names for recalls. Hi, knock, knock. We're doing a recall for, Representative so-and-so. They did not come to work for 3 weeks. They didn't. I didn't know about that. Yes, and they still demanded their pay. So you see, we're opening up conversations, and I really think we're preparing the way for 2026. All of our eyes should be on 2026. So just again, I want to encourage everyone who, has the ambition and the people to do these recalls. The Democrats are experts at getting other people to participate. So I've talked to some of the counties where They're getting new names. They're you know, they're collecting people's names that are frustrated, that want to do something, and those are all part of of what we need to be doing to be winning in 2026. So thank you. I can talk about TAPKI a little bit, and there are a lot of discrepancies in this election. So not only, as I mentioned, there was the 21 ballots that are thrown away. When you dig deep into the data, and that's what's really, really difficult about the Minnesota elections is, you know, I think people just want to be able to go look at a simple spreadsheet or, you know, punch a button and go, oh yeah, there's some problems here. But our elections are very complicated. And so then you have to ask, well, is that by design? Because it is difficult for people to really look into this data. One of the problems in Minnesota is the date to submit the data. And again, I mean, is this by design or accident? I think not. But they have changed the election law, and I don't know, but it was like 2016 or 18 that the counties don't have to submit their data to the Secretary of State until December 17th. Well, or it's 6 weeks after the election. So this time it was December 17th. Now, think about that. Candidates have to, you know, if they're going to contest an election, is before December 17th. So we're literally asking candidates to decide if they want to contest an election, and they don't even have the data available in front of them. And that's what we saw. I don't know if Representative Mecklen's still on here, but you know, there was counties that we were questioning it, and Sherburne was one and Scott was one. And sure enough, those were the counties that were also withholding data until the very end. I know I'm getting kind of long here. I could talk about. I have spent well over 100 hours, well over trying to dig into these elections since November 6th. When everyone else, I'm not saying everyone, but people in the Republican Party were waking up on November 6th and they were celebrating because we were in a tie and they ended the trifecta. And I don't mean to take away from that, because that was a good achievement. I mean, I was mad. I wanted to win more House seats. I wanted to be in the majority, and I really started digging into these elections. So just to get quickly, like I said, I could talk about this forever, but there are going to be other avenues, and I want to let the people of Minnesota, the people that are frustrated, the people that are in District 54A, the people of Shakopee and Scott County that feel like their vote was thrown away, that they are very upset about how this election went. I just want to reassure you, I'm on the elections committee. This is going to an ethics. You know, there's going to be like I don't know what it's called, like an ethics trial, something like that on the TAPKI race. But there's other avenues, and I want to reassure you, we are going to be pursuing every avenue, not the caucus. I'm not talking of the House Republican caucus, because they did sign an agreement, you know, to seat TAPKI. But there are other means, and you know, one of them is the community, the recall. That could be a means. There's federal investigations, and so in my mind, this is not done. But for election integrity in Minnesota, I will promise you, I will not stop until we have gotten our questions answered of all of these discrepancies that happened and how we can fix it. Because at the end of the day, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, we need to have confidence in our elections. And that is shaken right now in Minnesota, and rightfully so.
Okay, real quick, I just wanted to let you guys know, if we have to, we're going to try to get to some hands here. If we have to drop somebody down, we have people down below that want to come up. Don't be offended. We'll bring you back. Raise your hands. We'll bring you back up. Also want to announce that Rob Dorr has entered the room, and I'll let him introduce himself in a minute here. We got AK Kamara, who this space was originally set for. We were happy that session was let out, and we have these representatives in here to give us their details. So let's get back to the hands. Kim, I don't know who you had next.
I'm
And
going to
then-
drop myself down, and Tom was next.
Okay, thank you for that news. Appreciate
Thanks,
you.
News. Great to hear from you, and congratulations again. I'm very, very excited that you're running.
Hey, thanks for having the space. One thing I'll say is that some of the naysayers that are out there accusing Republicans about not being tough enough and different things like that, I don't want to be too general in that push, but it's really easy to accuse of someone else not doing something well enough, but not having a constructive, specific recommendation about what should be different. It's a lot easier to be an accuser than actually bringing solutions to the table. So that's an important thing to think about. The one part of the story that I didn't really hear, because I think it led to the reconvening of both parties, but there was a Supreme Court loss, and I didn't really hear what that was about. And then it seemed to be what brought everybody back to the table, so to speak. And I think that part of the story is pretty important, and I didn't quite hear that from the earlier description. So I don't know if Shane or others would have, or Pam would have the play-by-play on that, but I just thought that'd be an important piece to kind of understand from the account as well.
Just my 2 cents. I think Rob Dorr can explain that one really well. Not that I can't, but I think as Rob Dorr introduces himself, he has a very good insight of that Supreme Court decision that went against us. If Rob, you want to like hit that one. Rob is one of the busiest working people down at the Capitol, monitoring everything that goes on everywhere. So I think he has a pretty good insight on it.
Yeah, so that case had to deal with the definition of a quorum. The House had organized in tradition with House rules and some language within the Minnesota Constitution that there wasn't a specific number of a quorum, but it was determined off of a number of members elected. So common sense and actually a lot of our founding documents with the Minnesota Constitution would dictate that that's people who are elected and sworn in. So with 133 members sworn in, 67 would be a quorum. And that's how the House Republicans, despite Steve Simon gaveling out early, Representative Paul Anderson, who's the oldest member of the body that was present, took the rostrum in accordance with Minnesota law and rules of the House, took the rostrum and organized the House. Without any of the Democrats present. Ultimately, the Supreme Court decided that 68 was, in fact, the number for a quorum and declared that the House had not been lawfully organized. So we kind of hit the reset button until today.
Appreciate that, Rob. Appreciate you coming in. Tom, did you want to finish up on that?
No, that covers it. I'll let the other speakers jump in, but thanks again for having space.
Hey, thanks, Tom, for coming in. Tom does spaces with for the Minnesota group too. So follow Tom, and we'll be connecting, I'm sure, on the back channels and trying to put together more spaces. Thanks again, Tom. Did you have something there, Jay Sears? And then we're going to go to Chris. I think that's the order.
Yep.
Yeah. First, thank you, Walter and Pam, after being in Minnesota my whole life, 40 years, for standing up and doing this. So thank you for that. I have a question regarding the fraud committee. My understanding is we do not have enough for subpoena power. Do you foresee troubles with getting commissioners there and all those sorts of things? You know, when they start digging in, getting pushed back, perhaps dealing with that.
I don't know if Walter is still on. So yeah, I had just found that out today. I guess I think I was thinking that it did have subpoena power. Kristen Robbins is the one that's chairing that committee, and she said you could get it if one Democrat voted with us, that we would get subpoena power. So I do think, you know, it's going to depend on the situations and what we're looking.
Did Pam get a phone call?
Yeah, it sounds like it.
All right, I can kind of take over where she left off. So, technically, every legislative committee has subpoena power. Like any committee can subpoena somebody. The process is pretty sloppy, though, in terms of how it can be enforced and what it takes in order to enforce it. What I would suggest and what we expect is that we're not going to need to subpoena people. We've got whistleblowers coming out of the woodwork, just eager to tell us their real lived experience of seeing fraud take place from their various positions, whether it's within a state government agency or it's in a nonprofit, or it's somebody who is supposed to be served and they weren't, or they were taken advantage of in some way. We're going to have a wealth, a cornucopia of information to dig into and to present to the people of Minnesota via this fraud committee, which, by the way, isn't just going to be a in-session thing. Like, our session ends on May 19th, I believe the date is. But we can continue to have hearings throughout the interim. So this is going to be a Chinese water torture for the DFL as we are continually exposing and bringing to light the various forms of malfeasance that they have enabled through the legislation that they have authored, they have passed, and their Governor Tim Walz has signed.
Awesome. Thank you. And nice work.
Thanks, Jay. All right, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I just want to take a second and clarify here. I didn't mean to, Walter, I didn't mean to take anything away from the way you're doing business up there in terms of your legislative prowess or, your ability to win elections. That was not my intent at all. This lawfare thing is a completely different animal, and the way that these people work in terms of the courts is just different. And right now, you can look on a national level with the President of the United States, and every time he signs an executive order, there's a rush to the nearest federal courthouse to find some Jimmy Carter judge or some Barack Obama judge or some Joe Biden judge to make that go away. Or at least put it on hold. And, what you all have accomplished, deserves a lot of praise. My only point is that, don't be afraid to nail these people to the wall. And don't be afraid to use their tools against them in the courts. And if you have to use different courts in order to accomplish that, they just need to understand that not only are you going to be serious legislators and do the right thing and do all the things that you talked about, which I 100% agree with, but you're also not going to allow them to play their games and to use this lawfare in ways that are going to try to undo everything that you've accomplished. So congratulations on your wins. And I hope hope you have a lot more because you deserve them. And Minnesota, outside of, from what I understand, outside of this, this hellhole that's, right around the state capitol up there is pretty red state. So hopefully, you all are going to be in the firm majority soon. But you've got the opportunity to prove yourselves, and I look forward to seeing what's happening.
You're right, Chris. If we stay on course like Pam said and start now, there's nothing that can stop us. We have momentum, and you are exactly right. And now's the time to start looking forward to the next campaigns. I know they're 2 years out, but there's no time to waste. I see AK's in here. AK, you want to elaborate on what Chris was saying, or do you have some thoughts you want to share? First, introduce yourself, would you please?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me on. Yeah, I was, when I told you I'd do the space with you, I didn't realize I looked at my calendar and I'd actually put a funeral that I have on. I'm a Freemason, and one of our brothers passed away, and so had to attend that. And so I guess first and foremost, my name's AK Kamara. I am what is called the Republican National Committee Man for the state of Minnesota. The quick and dirty of it is there are 168 members that comprise the RNC, consider that the National Republican Party, and every state in our 6 territories elects one man, committee man, one woman, and then the party chair. And so between that and then the elected officers of the RNC, I am in that body. In specifics to Minnesota, our Republican Party in Minnesota also grants me a seat on the state executive committee. And so I am usually pretty well abreast of what is going on within the Republican Party of Minnesota. And that's just, I guess, a little bit about me. I also just, if you follow me on X, it's kind of like my stream of consciousness mixed with my political opinions and sometimes my very crass humor. I create content basically across all social media platforms. TikTok's my largest following. I got about 150,000 or so followers over there. And then I also do local radio as a regular guest. And yeah, that's basically, John Justice show and sometimes on Jack Tomzak show. That's who I am. In regards to, I guess, the current state of things in the state of Minnesota, it sounds like we've had some legislative perspective, which clearly knows more about the ins and outs of what the agreement was that Speaker Dameth reached with Melissa Hortman. I guess the thing that I would like to, maybe offer is an understanding that the narrative that's trying to come from the DFL is that, Republicans want nothing. Basically, this is the same agreement that was offered at the time January 14th was coming around, which it clearly is not. The major takeaways is that Speaker Dameth will be the speaker, assuming that no Republicans resign, flip sides, or die. And that was the biggest contention. Like if we're just stripping this down and being completely candid, that is what the DFL, quote unquote, had their strike for, is because they did not want to guarantee that Lisa Dameth would be the speaker for the next 2 sessions, right? So like that in and of itself is a huge win. And why is it a big win? Because Lisa has shown that she believes in standing on principle and having resolve. And I think that is the scariest realization that the DFL came to, is that their last kind of shot was last session, right? That was their last opportunity to shove through every radical Marxist leftist bill that they could dream or imagine. And they punted on a few things for political expediency, such as turning Minnesota into a sanctuary state, such as having the Uber rideshare bill for the entire state, right? Like there's other things, comprehensive sex education. There's a bunch of terrible Marxist bills that they kind of punted, hoping that this session they'd be able to push it through. And that's truly why they didn't want to give up that one major piece. The other piece clearly is that when we look at the way that these committees are assigned, we have grave concerns about the 54A race with Tabke, right? And so again, that was another win for us, and being able to have that committee to be able to find out what's going on. But here's the other thing. I know some people roll their eyes and they're like, it's not a big win. You know, you guys are ceding power, and ceding tab key is just basically capitulating. It's like, well, there's a couple of steps that have happened in this process. One, a judge ruled that tab key did indeed win that recount. So you already have one legal standing. And so the idea that we would gamble everything to not see tab key, and I think technically it was probably the bargaining chip, and this is just my opinion, right? I've never had conversations with Speaker Damath about this or anyone else, but I believe that it was a negotiating chip, because the gamble is, if the Republicans don't seat tab key and then the DFL sues the Republican caucus, and then, you know, the gamble is, okay, a judge says, well, guess what? There was already a ruling at a district court saying that tab key won clearly. The other way it could go is that if we actually have more evidence from having this evidentiary, you know, committee hearing, not evidentiary, but hopefully getting to evidentiary committee hearings, looking into what exactly happened, then maybe we could bolster. So that's kind of the gamble. That's the bargaining chip, is that we won there as well, because if we actually are able to find, which I think does exist, I do actually think that there was clearly cheating that happened. To what level, I don't know. But I believe that if we have more evidence on our side, then the whole world opens back up. Maybe there can be a new court challenge to say, in light of this new evidence, that tab key should be unseated, and therefore we should have another special election. So that, again, is a win for us. The other win to me is that, if we're just kind of breaking things down, if the guy that's running in 40B, I don't know the Democrat's name, but let's say that he wins, or let's say that you know, Wickstrom comes in real close, but he doesn't end up being able to cross the finish line, and it goes back to a split. Well, guess what? The DFL doesn't have enough votes to basically undo anything that the Republicans are doing. So that's, again, another win for us. And so if we can pick up that seat, that's even better, because then, you know, then we can actually have that 68 number, and then we can do some really, really great things. But all of this is under the context. Okay, let's be very clear. Tim Walz is still the governor, and the DFL right now is in control of the Senate. So the best that we can do is we can try and change the narrative going into the next election cycle, into 26, and being able to use subpoena powers to uncover all of the negligence, fraud, malfeasance, and lies that has been occurring under the watch of Democrats in Minnesota. And that's what we've won. So I just think it's important for people to have that proper context, wanting to be able to say, well, we need to win everything. How dare we even give them one committee chair? Like, that is absolute garbage. It's like, listen, we're still able to do what our main goal is. We knew that we weren't going to be able to pass good legislation that the DFL is going to vote on in the Senate and that Governor Walz is going to sign. That ain't happening. I mean, the only way I could see that happening would be if it was an issue that was so it was so popular among the entire populace of Minnesota that Walz would take, you know, sign it and then run victory laps that he's just the world's greatest governor or whatever. But anything that actually tries to shrink the size of government or make it more accountable or get rid of fraud, those are things that the Walz ain't never going to sign off on. I'm sorry. It's just not the way that this machine operates. And so that's why I look in totality that the House Republicans definitely won. We should be lauding the efforts of everyone in those negotiating rooms. And I honestly think the only reason that this went this way is because I think there were some signal flares coming from the Supreme Court that this ruling on the case that was actually oral arguments were heard today in regards to, you know, challenging whether or not Steve Simon has the authority as a member of the executive branch to shut down any discourse in the House. I think that was starting to lean more towards Republicans. And so I think that's why the DFL came to the table, because if that ruling would have went that way, then we wouldn't have needed them to do anything. And they wouldn't even at least be able to have a couple of committee chairs so they can bang their drums and run around and try and, again, set the stage for their political victories in 26. So that is my diarrhea of the mouth opinion explanation of what's going on. I'm glad to take questions or whatever. So there you go.
Appreciate you coming in, AK. That's definitely helpful. I'm going to throw a little something out there just to gnaw on a little bit, because if you want to argue that, you know, the Republicans could have done this or could have done that, I still think overall, regardless of any of that, I wanted to acknowledge what they have done and what they did go through for the past 2 years down there. I want to show great appreciation and for that, right? I had I just wondered if, you know, the whole first Black woman speaker of the House thing, I saw that as an ace in the hole. Do you think that that was used to its fullest, or do you think we might have missed out on an opportunity there? And let me just add too that I come from that foot in the throat when you got them down type of mentality. And so a lot of people have. We've been having our ass, excuse my language, but we've had our asses handed to us in Minnesota for so long that we have this relentless no give attitude. But you're right, that type of attitude can cause you to make mistakes, and we get that. But I just wanted to ask that one question. Did we use that to the fullest? Because that was an opportunity. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm of two minds on this. One side is, of course, it's great to be able to have historic things that we do, recognize when historic things happen. But let's be honest, on the right side of the aisle, we don't really care about identity politics. I mean, we say we do, but we honestly don't. It's like Lisa Damath is a great speaker because of all of her characteristics, traits, morale, her morals, her values, right? Like the fact that she has this immutable trait that she is a biracial woman, to us on the right really doesn't matter. If anything, on the other mind of the way that I'm looking at it, it's kind of fun to dunk on Democrats because like they have this whole hierarchy of victimhood, right? Like if you're Black and then you're female, like, ooh, like if you're critical, that's racist, even if you're like, no, this is only about policy. It's like, well, it can't be because of their hierarchy of victimhood. So like that mindset, I guess we could use it to maybe try and dunk on them a little bit harder. But I still don't think that like the average Minnesotan actually cares about that. So it's like, we note it, we celebrate, this is great, yeah. But that's not the way that I think most Americans are built, to recognize these immutable traits beyond that and be like, well, now you can't attack us. I know that that's what happens every time from the left, right? So if the left is attacked at all by someone on the right, and it's a person that's in their victim of hierarchy, twisted demonic flow chart, then it's always, oh, it's because you're racist or you're homophobic or whatever, right? But that's not how most people think, and that's definitely not how the right thinks. So to answer your question, do I think we could have used it more? I mean, if we're trying to troll them, sure, but I don't think it actually would have been effective because I don't think most people, most Minnesotans don't view that if you are critical of a person that is non-white, so therefore a part of the minority part of a population, that it is intrinsically racist or sexist or ableist. I don't think that most people actually think that. So that's what my position is. I think that we used it as much as we should. I think that we can use it as kind of a narrative changer if they try and say, well, Republicans are racist. Like, oh, are they? Look who their Speaker of the House is, and yada yada yada. But that's kind of how I perceive it. But hopefully that answers your question.
Good enough for me. I just thought I'd throw that out there because I wanted to make sure that because those guys are relentless towards the Republicans and have been for a long time, and I thought that maybe just like a lot of people, and I'm glad you guys are clearing this up for us because it's really helpful to hear what your thought process was. But yeah, I mean, to argue the point for the people that are not completely satisfied, and nobody ever will be, I would just say that, we should have made them eat every part of what they've created here, in a sense. You know what I mean?
Let me just say this, right? The reason I'm not a legislator, the reason why I don't have any desire to be a legislator is because that's part of, governing effectively. Like you actually have to try and lay out what's the best path forward. The reason I'm the RNC committee man is because I am a dogged partisan person. Like, I think that Democrats are a terrible party. I hope they never win another elected seat in the history of the United States. If they ended tomorrow, I would be so happy. I do not believe that they have, good policies, good ideas. I believe that there are Democrats that are good people, but I think that their ideology is warped, twisted, and in certain senses demonic. So I would never be able to run and win for office. And so I say that because ultimately if I was in charge magically, I would give them nothing. I would give the DFL nothing. But that also is going to work against you, because it's going to be like, oh, Republicans are so mean and nasty. They won't even agree to share anything. And it's like, well, yeah, we shouldn't, because the DFL would never return to us in kind what we give them, even the little that we did give them, which we gave them something. Like, if we're just being candid about it, we gave them something. We didn't have to, but then we would have been in the same situation. But my point is that that's why I'm not a legislator. I don't like to give to Democrats anything, because they are not operating from a principle in which they actually believe in having shared power. Like, that doesn't actually exist in the Democrat mindset anymore. Maybe it did once upon a time back in the day or something like that, but it's all about power. That's all that matters to them. If they can win a narrative and they can beat you over the head, they will do anything to keep that power. And I think that Republicans should not change our values to reflect that. But when we have the opportunity to, like you said, put our foot on their throat, we do not let go. But that's also, again, you're not going to be able to win a lot of elections that way with an electorate that also doesn't have that, like, I smell blood in the water and I'm going to, take that final kill shot. But that's just kind of my perspective. I also did want to add in something else too. I don't know how much you all talked about it, but the recall efforts, just again, my opinion, they are effectively dead. I know that some people don't want to have to admit that. I'm not saying that you should kill your recall effort. I'm just saying that if we get to the final step, where a judge, let's say, from the Supreme Court, kicks it back to Secretary Simon. Simon says, you're good to go. Go ahead and collect that 25% signature number. I just think it's hard to find that same momentum to be like, well, they're all showing up now, but wasn't that really crappy when for 23 days they didn't show up and they billed us for like $210,000? That might work, but effectively it's dead. So I wanted to offer that opinion. I'm not trying to tell you to not push out a recall in your state, your legislative district, but I just kind of think that's where the state of things are. The Republican Party of Minnesota clearly wants to encourage the grassroots and BPOUs to do what they think is best. So they're not telling people to not do it. But I'm just saying, if I'm giving you my opinion, I think it's effectively done. And I think that's actually a part of the reason, along with the Supreme Court in Minnesota kind of setting up some signal flares that they were going to rule in the favor of Republicans. I also think that there was a tremendous amount of pressure on the recalls that the DFL did not foresee happening. And I think that was the other reason why they decided to bend the knee and capitulate like they did. But yeah, just want to throw that out there too.
Yeah, I believe that there's a way that we can put our foot in their throats metaphorically, in a sense that we start going to work now to make sure that they never get the power of the gavel ever again.
Yeah.
That's the push. That's going to be how we stick our foot in their throat. But I'm going to go
Take
ahead.
order. My mic is glitching. You hear me, sir?
Yeah, Jeff, I was coming to you. You want to go ahead and ask your question or give us? Yeah, it might be a little glitchy, but let's see if we can get you. Go ahead and try it.
Try again, Jeff.
No, you might have to go out, turn your phone off, or restart your phone, and then come back in and see if we can get you back. We'll pull you right back up, okay? So anyway, Kim, do you want to do something, reset the room, or do you have anything you wanted to ask specifically? Or Chris? Or what's Adam doing down there?
I was just getting Jeff back up. I did want to reset the room. Guys, please repost the space, bottom right-hand corner, click on the bubble, and then click on the arrows going around in the square. You can repost it. You can quote post. Appreciate everybody being here. Want to say hi to everybody who is streaming on Rumble and Pill.net, QUXTV. kick.com, X Live, and YouTube. I think I got them all.
So let me ask you this: is the Supreme Court in Minnesota elected or appointed?
Elected. And then on, like, basically they have limits in regards to age. But like the current makeup right now, it's basically moderates and liberals. There is a couple of folks, because like you can appoint and then they have to run for election basically. So it's like they age out in the middle of their term or whatever. And I might be getting some of the specifics wrong. And people are probably like, no, dude, you're wrong. But basically, if you get appointed and then you'll have to stand for election in the next cycle. And then once you win, like basically there's a limit. I don't know again if the limit is like age, if it's like 65 or 70 or something like that. But there are going to be a handful of the Supreme Court justices that are up. But typically what the Democrats have had a long history of doing is that they will retire before a Democrat is done. And then the Democrat will appoint and then they'll stand for election, right? So Supreme Court races in Minnesota don't get a ton of press. They don't get a ton of, unlike Wisconsin, which is going to probably have like tens, if not $100 million thrown into the Supreme Court race. But yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, I think the last time I actually paid attention to the Minnesota Supreme Court was when Alan Page was a Supreme Court justice.
Oh yeah, yep.
Purple people leaders.
I actually worked
No
at his
purple
house.
people
Worked at
leaders.
his house before. He's a
Wow.
fine man.
Yeah, no, he's
Yeah.
a good dude. I like
Yeah, Alan Page belonged on the Supreme Court. Yeah, he was a very thoughtful man.
So Jeff, did you want to say something?
Smart football player. He was very smart, Chris. He was as smart as Peyton Manning, one of the smartest quarterbacks I've ever seen in my life. That guy's sharp.
Jeff, did you have a question? I think you were trying to ask a question before you dropped down before.
Yeah, I was considering I love Minnesota. I love that place. The freshwater capital of the world. The most valued resource, fresh water. Gold, diamonds, can't eat that or drink that. And I find it quite disturbing that Ilhan Omar and the Somalis that Barack Obama made sure they put, I don't know what the count is now, probably at least 200,000 in Minnesota, maybe more. I think that it's imperative that we get some sensible leadership in Minnesota. Most importantly, Houston, Texas is very important, but fresh water is more important. It's more important than the oil that comes down from Canada. And I'm just really, really concerned that Ilhan Omar pledges her allegiance to Somalia over the United States, and she actually voted with Israel. And I just find her leadership quite suspect with all the evidence that's been talked about. Marrying her brother and just the unethical behavior that she displays in the at Washington, D.C. And I was just thinking that 90% of the Somalians would vote Republican for the sake of Haram, and the Quran is sin. And the Democrat Party has no platform that I see that is conducive towards anything that's positive. Look what they did to Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And I find that most suspicious that a man that is wanting to make America healthy again in the Maha movement which I love. I really, really love that MAGA equilibrium. It just confuses me that the Somalis would vote for the party of Haram. That's just their word, the Quran. And just your take on it, AK.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure meeting you,
No,
sir.
it's a pleasure meeting you. Well, listen, I think you're onto something, especially with what you're saying at the very end there about how is it that we have this relatively religious conservative population here in Minnesota, but they tend to vote overwhelmingly, right, for Democrats. And I think the best way to answer it is human beings are motivated by cultural structure, right? That's just that's the king of everything. If you take someone that's from, I don't care where, from Aiken, Minnesota, and you plop them in the middle of New York City, there's going to be a big culture shock, not because they were raised in a rural community necessarily, but because the structures of how their culture operates are completely different, right? And so what you find in the Somali population, like you find in most ethnic groups that are kind of all plowed together in, you know, familial and all these different things, is that you find that there is a hierarchy of not just culture, but there's a hierarchy of the way that things are done, right? So you have ethnic groups, tribal groups that have leaders, and in the dynamic of human beings, there's always struggles for power. And for the longest time, the Somali power structure of most of the chiefs has voted for Democrats. And why do they vote for Democrats? Well, because Democrats offer open checkbooks and say, we'll do anything and everything for you. Now, as someone that's been involved in the Republican Party since 2006, this has been the kind of the thing that everyone always tries to focus on. How can we get more Somalis to vote Republican? And there's been a bunch of different strategies and ways to go about doing it. And I'm here to tell people, and I've said it to people, and I'm actually implementing this as a member, again, on the state executive committee and working with people like Walter Hudson. The formula isn't like, there's no magic formula. It takes time, and it takes finding people in these communities that care about their community in the same way that people outside of that community care about theirs. And here's what I mean. I live in Forest Lake, right? I live in House District 33B. I care about my community. That's why I'm a Mason. That's why I'm a Lion. It's why I help out, because I care about my community. The reason that I'm in politics is because I, again, care about my community. No one has induced me. No one has given me money, but I dedicate an insane amount of time, energy, and resources into my community. We need to find those same people in the Somali community. The model has been, let's go in and then just offer them money or something like that. And we can't compete because the Democrats have far deeper checkbooks in Minnesota. So there's no way to quote unquote buy them off. Also, I also think buying off people is terrible, because then your loyalty is only to that actual, you know, value of the dollar. So what I have been trying to do, and I've actually found some success, been able to connect with some really good leaders in the Somali community, as I say, listen, man, if you want your community to be safer, if you want your community to have greater representation, you have to care about your community just as much as I care about my community. And if you don't, I can't make it happen for you. But you have seen a shift. So one of the things that was more fascinating towards the end of this election cycle with President Trump and the way that he really appeals to a populist movement is that there was a significant percentage of Somalis that actually voted for Trump over Kamala. Now, in the grand scheme, sure, we're talking about the difference between voting for Kamala at a clip of like 92% to voting for Kamala at a clip of 78%. I mean, it's still overwhelmingly, but it was a decent shift in certain precincts. Now, as a whole, it wasn't that big of a shift, but it definitely was movement. But I think that there's something that has been, if you want to say, planted and rooted that I think can grow. And again, I'm a big believer of things growing from the grassroots up. You have to be able to go into these communities and say, if you want this, you have to take it. Because I can't come in as an outsider. I grew up in rural North Dakota. I live in Forest Lake. I'll be very candid. I don't know anything about living in Minneapolis because I've never actually lived there for any amount of time. I'm not an urban city dweller. I prefer to actually have some wider open spaces and not hear the sound of cars all day. So I can't go into these communities and say, hey, guess what? My skin is black and I grew up and my name is actually Abdulrahman Magba Kamara, but you call me AK. So I grew up, my father practiced Islam. Like those little things aren't going to really matter as much because I'm not from that community. So how can I go into a community that I have no buy-in at all and then try and force them to like vote Republican? That's been the Republican model and it's failed miserably. The best model is to encourage and empower people in those communities and to then to be able to get them plugged into the system. And there's going to be pushback because when you have, let's say, 70 Somalis show up to a precinct caucus and all the people that have been showing up for 20 years are like, whoa, 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 like this is how things are run, that's going to cause some tension. But if they have intentions to actually shape their communities to be reflective of conservative, right-wing, again, populist, right-of-center values, then we need to encourage and flourish that. So hopefully you understand what I'm trying to say. And I think that this is going to be the paradigm shift that we're seeing, not just in Minnesota, but across the country, is like we have to empower people where they are and then give them the resources in regards to like how things work, not money resources, but how things work so they can actually be just as motivated to go out in the community as I am in my community.
It'd be interesting to see what the impact is of all of this rooting out of the aid, the federal aid, and all that. How that impacts some of these activist groups that have been just rolling in the dough.
Oh yeah, that's another part too, right? When I talk about they turn to Democrats because they give them money, well, it's not like they're like literally saying like, here's a check from the DFL party to so and so. It's all through this aid, right? Like the nonprofits, the NGOs are the biggest money laundering scheme. We've known about it forever on the right. We talk about it, but it's always pushed aside that we're a conspiracy. And it's because a lot of people have benefited from these money laundering schemes that are happening on the right and on the left. And so to see, again, the tenacity to get rid of this stuff that's coming from President Trump's administration, it's going to, I think, have an effect where it makes states have to say, we have to look at this stuff. And of course, with Minnesota, with defeating our future fraud, and now I think Bill Glahn, his tracker's up to like $610 million in fraud that's occurred in Minnesota just in the last, I think it's like 5 or 6 years. I think people are going to start saying like, no, we have to open up the books and find out what's going on if we get some pressure. But none of that really matters if we don't actually, flip a couple of constitutional officers or even, get the grand prize of flipping the governorship. But again, we can start to make enough noise. But I agree that coming from a national perspective, if the money starts to dry up, people's attitudes are going to change a whole lot because they're going to say, hey, remember all the money you were giving us? And now they're going to be like, we're open to talk to anyone. And the conversation I've actually had very candidly with more than one Somali leader is like, well, what are you going to give us financially? And I'm like, nothing. I will give you nothing. But what I can say is if you like what you have, if you like the fentanyl overdoses that are starting to devastate your population centers, if you like all of the crime happening, then go ahead, continue to vote for Democrats. If you think that that's garbage and you want to see a change in leadership, then you have to do it yourself, man. Like this is what's so amazing about what I believe Republican values is like, you have to be the change that you want. And then you actually have to go out there and be empowered in a system that allows we, the people, to be in control. But that's up to you. If you think someone's going to come in from the top down, then you have what you have right now in urban centers all across America. They're failing, they're collapsing on their own weight because there's just not enough legal money to go around. It's completely funded by money laundering, 100%.
Did you, with Barack Obama, and he displaced the Somalians to Minnesota years ago when he was president, do you remember that, or what's your take on that, AK? If you don't mind me asking.
I mean, to be honest, it's more of like an economic question or issue. So, if you go back to Senator Norm Coleman when he was mayor of St. Paul, it was pretty like across the board that Republicans and Democrats were like, hey, let's take a bunch of refugees because there's money that comes with refugees, right? And so like that has been a true thing as well. So like, I don't think that there was necessarily a more ulterior motive. Again, this is just my opinion and based off of the reading that I've done, and some people might have different opinions on it, and that's fine. But I don't think that there was like, Obama's like, oh, I'm going to send a bunch of Muslims to Minnesota to like corrupt the system. I think people in Minnesota were like, send them here because we want the money. give us the money. And when you get those federal dollars, everyone sometimes it's like, you get what you wish for, man. Because again, that culture shock is different. And as myself being like, I guess you could call me half immigrant. My mother is white European, grew up in North Dakota, multi-generational. My father immigrated from Sierra Leone, West Africa, when he was in his 20s. And so I understand, what it's like to find the cultural differences. But as you can see in different population centers across the United States, when that cultural assimilation doesn't happen, and it's not even the initial generation that comes in, it's their kids. And this is happening actually all over Europe, is that they feel like they're not welcome. They feel like they're not a place. And that happens when you jam a bunch of people together and then you say, like, here's your own little cultural identity that doesn't actually, meld very well with the American culture. And then you start to have chaos where it's like them against, it's like us versus them. And like to them, they're viewing that, oh, like we can take advantage of these systems, and it's terrible. But that's why you have to use, in my opinion, law enforcement and get rid of a lot of this money, and you'll see a natural flow of equilibrium. But yeah, it's gonna be brutal for a while, man. I mean, but this is what happens when you do these huge social experiments. And it wasn't just Obama too. Like I said, this has happened all across Europe. And most of it, I get, like I said, my premise is that it's all economic. The same reason why we have basically slave labor in this country, with criminal aliens working everywhere, and all of these large corporations are freaking out like, oh, it's going to destroy us economically. It's like, well, yeah, because we've created an economy that is dependent on slave-like labor, and it's going to be painful, but it's the right thing to do. Like, we shouldn't have criminal aliens being taken advantage of. Let them go back to their country, let them come through legally, and if it's going to be a little bit painful, that's the right thing to do. Because I believe Democrats had that argument back during slavery of who will pick our cotton. It's like, well, it's going to be difficult. You're going to have to weather the storm. But when you have something that's as immoral as slavery, that's the right thing to do, is to get rid of it. But I digress.
Well, it's not only slavery, right? It's all of the child trafficking that's going on. So you got to put that little twist in there as well.
Right.
I think it's going to be particularly.
Absolutely.
I think it's going to be particularly rough on the community that we were just discussing, because at some point, like you said, that money is going to cut off, and especially now that Trump is in there and Elon and what they're doing, it's just going to shut off like a spigot. And what kind of position does that put the taxpayers and the safety of Minnesota in when we have those large communities like that are being fed by the federal government? I thought for a long time, I've always said, we've sold our souls, Minnesota, to the federal government. We are now a federal state. Now we're going to end up in a situation where the money is running out, and it's going to be completely shut off here in a bit, because they can only take so much money from the taxpayers and get ready for that to happen as well. So I don't know. I still think, regardless of the community, they have about 300,000 or so, I think, Somalis here. But regardless of that, what is the number of people, I can't remember the percentage of Republicans that did not make it out to vote or have not volunteered or done anything to help our candidates get elected? Do you know that, Kamara?
Yeah, I don't know the exact number. I mean, there's a lot of anecdotal stories. We talked about it kind of this election cycle, that you could go into like deep red, let's say like Hubbard County, and based off of, again, the total number based off of like data projection. So Minnesota, you don't identify as a Republican or Democrat when you go register to vote. But through our voter rolls and through other public data, you start to model, like L2, for instance, is one of the data models. And we have our voter file, the Republican Party in Minnesota does. And so we can model who we think are Republicans. Now, based off of that modeling data, we identified that, again, in a place like Hubbard County that is like red, that's something like, I don't know, like 15% of the eligible voting population of Republicans didn't show up. Like these are people that we know based off of all of the data, like they have to be Republican, right? Like it could be magazines they subscribe to, you know, websites that they visited, like all of this public data that ends up getting purchased and all this different stuff. And so, you know, that's kind of what the number is. It's like somewhere between like 10 and 15% of just increasing that turnout even higher. And I'm not talking about like making it 100% or anything like that. I'm saying like making it like, you know, 75%. And so again, in certain areas, there definitely could be more growth and just getting more people to show up. It's difficult though. And the reason it's difficult is because if you live, especially in a very, very rural area, life is probably relatively good for you, right? Like the state government might come in and mess with you when it comes to property rights and, you know, some stuff like that. And you might have beefs with the county or whatever it might be. But like, if you're in rural Minnesota and you don't really go to Minneapolis or St. Paul for really a whole lot of anything, like you're peachy.
You're good.
So it's hard to get them to really feel the same effects that you're gonna feel everywhere else. Like, I mean, let's just take eggs as an example. If you're a rural Minnesotan, you probably rarely go to the grocery store. I mean, you go to the grocery store, but I'm saying like it's like usually like a once every month trip or something like that. But like the majority of like your local food and stuff like that, you know, again, you're not as impacted by the prices of things. And so like again, if you got a bunch of people around you that have chickens and they're laying eggs, you don't really care that eggs are whatever $7 for a dozen or whatever, because you still get your eggs from the guy or gal that lives over by you. And the same with
$3 a dozen.
Exactly. And so that's why it's more difficult to get those numbers to turn out, because they're just not impacted in the same way that folks that do rely on, you know, going to the grocery market, you know, every day to get their stuff and have to deal with a crime because there's people, you know, they have to run around in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and whatever it might be. So that's what that number is. And so listen, in the game of like moving small groups of people from one column to the other, because that's how you win elections, it's really small groups of people. We're going to try and do like all of the above approach the Republicans are. I think that President Trump has opened up some pretty big opportunities for us. Again, like when you look at the number of black males that voted for Trump, I mean, we're nationally, you're looking at 30%. You look at the state of Minnesota, based off of some of the exit polling data that I saw, that number
100% of the men
cracked
that are
50%.
Hey, don't interrupt, Jeff. Keep your mic muted. Raise your hand, please.
Yeah, no, that's all right. And so I'm just saying that there's opportunities for Republicans to be able to seize on, but we also we can't forget about the rural folks and making sure that they're still turning out, trying to get higher turnout there. But then again, picking up on these opportunities from these non-traditional groups of voters, that non-traditional Republican, I should say, groups of voters, and being able to say like, hey, I know you voted for Trump, and you might say, well, screw the rest of the Republican Party, they suck. So it's going to be up to us to try and convince them like, hey, you know, we don't suck. So we'll see how that goes.
Go ahead, Chris.
So my hand didn't come down. I wonder what's up with that.
I'll go, Chris. Let me go real fast, please, sir.
All right, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, Chris, thank you so much, man. You're one of the best people I've met on the space. You're a classic gentleman, a very respectful person, and a very knowledgeable person in how our government runs. Absolutely.
Not too many compliments there. We don't want him to get a big head or anything.
He's gonna get a really big head now. Thanks.
And it's okay. It's okay. Chris is my advisor, 100%. And no real man votes for 43 million abortions, for child sex trafficking, for pedophilia, for the government throwing people in prison for no good reason, like the J6ers. And I just I just find it odd that our friends in Minnesota and the Somalians in particular would not support us, the America. You know, my friend from Nigeria, he went through the classes to get his citizenship and his family. And he had to study the Constitution, the amendments, the Declaration, and all the details, unlike our politicians who don't even know the different branches of our government, like AOC. And he called me and he said, "Hey, Jeff from Nigeria, I love him. His name is in Nigerian is Oliomo Shome or something like that. And it means thanks to God." He told me, he said, "Jeff," he said, "I got my citizenship and I want to call you." He's my employee, one of my best hands, my first alternate lead when I worked at for commercial aviation. And he was so grateful. And he said, "I only called 3 people." He didn't call Nigeria. He called his brother, and he called another guy, and he called me. And he said, "You know," he said, "I love America. My family are Americans, and he passed the test to become American." And he said, "The first thing I'm going to do," Chris, you'll have a laugh. He said, "I'm going to vote for Trump." And I just sat back there and I was like, God, this guy's really smart, good mechanic, great mechanic. And I just was grateful and thankful that America has been the melting pot of the world, as it was said years ago. And I just look forward to Minnesota backing us. I just can't see Ilhan Omar being in any type of position over there when she doesn't side with the Minnesotans. I hope I said that right. And I just love country people. I love being in the country, even though I'm from Houston, which is brutal, terrible, brutal place, like LA or Chicago. It's brutal. But I'm just grateful and thankful that you guys let me just jibber jabber. And AK, man, I appreciate you more than anything. I appreciate you, sir. Thank you for standing up for Minnesota. And American Mission is the antithesis of how to make our country better. And I just appreciate everybody's input. And I'm sorry for wasting all the time. Thanks.
Wait, isn't antithesis the opposite of?
It is.
All right, now we're going to let Chris babble for a minute. Appreciate you, Jeff.
Thank you. I appreciate you guys more than anything. Gives me hope. Gives me hope in all of it, that you guys will take over for Chris and myself. I have confidence now, Adam, everybody, all of my friends here. And I really appreciate everybody here. And I have a lot of faith and confidence. I really do. Thank you.
Well, Walter's teaching us how to step on their throats. So that's what we're doing. Right, Walter?
Well,
metaphorically.
Yeah. Peacefully.
Yeah, don't put me in a grave yet. I got lots of Social Security to collect. So I was thinking, which sometimes is dangerous, about this motor voter thing, right? Because they use motor voter to try to get people who are not supposed to vote, right? And then, Then they don't want you to use the very place that you go to register to vote, where they give you an ID, right? They don't want you to use that ID to go vote with. So, you've got disconnected logic right there, right off the bat, right? So I've got some better logic. Okay, it's called fuzzy logic. So we get state legislatures to pass laws that say, fine, you don't want to use a voter ID? Your driver's license expires every 2 years. And if you don't show up to vote, you don't get to renew your driver's license. Now, how much or how many more people do you think are going to show up to vote if they're not going to get their driver's license?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think that this is an issue that, as much as I'm a states' rights guy, I think that we have to have some federal legislation in regards to voting. I know that President Trump, it was one of his 20 campaign platform issues. But we have to be able to have again, I hate to have the federal government step in certain regards, but the way that Minnesota operates, it baffles people's minds. Like, it's, in my role as national committee man, I talk to basically, high-ranking Republicans from states all across and territories all across the United States. And I had one specific conversation with Pam Bondi, our recently confirmed Attorney General, and she was the AG for Florida. And so she came to Minnesota with Laura Trump, Michael Whatley, and they were doing election integrity. And so
Okay, can someone at least agree it was kind of awkward? Not saying he's not a good guy. It was just a little. It was a little. I don't know.
Listen, man, some people like to hit the sauce a little bit when they get off work, cut loose a little bit, you know?
Drinking and spaces do not
I
go
like
together.
AK. I haven't met you yet, but nice to meet you. You seem like a great guy.
It's nice to meet you too.
Yeah, nice to meet you. Sorry. Yeah, Jen dropped off, and then Kim, and I'm looking. I pulled up my weather app, and I'm going, nothing over Florida but clear skies. So it wasn't the internet.
Well, I have Starlink now, so you can blame Elon.
Well, both of you have Starlink.
Yes, my Starlink is my backup,
Oh, okay.
and I have to use it quite often.
Does AK know we're streaming this? We were.
Oh, you know what? I'm on my ID, so probably. Kelly, you found me, right?
Well, he's not a speaker.
Yeah, she'll give you a thumbs up.
So, okay, I have a question for you. I don't know if it's a bit off topic or if you could answer it. But I'm actually really interested in the northern border along Minnesota. So where Minnesota and Canada meet. What is the border patrol like up there? Have you had any interaction with them? And then are they doing anything to prevent sorry
To prevent border crossings?
Yeah, so border patrol basically from the time that I was 5, that's when my family moved from California up to North Dakota, and that's where I was raised. About 50, 60 miles from the Canadian border, and then in Minnesota, of course, we have our northern border. Like, they're active, they're out there. Obviously, the border situation is significantly more lax in most parts of northern Minnesota, and in North Dakota, there's just wide open spaces that you can walk across. But I know that it's been something that President Trump has wanted to build up. What you've actually found a lot of is, like, if you go to Duluth or you go to Grand Rapids, Ely, Tower, some of the larger population centers that are in northern Minnesota, you'll see Border Patrol basically everywhere in their little white and green SUVs. And there's a lot of stuff that actually happens on tribal lands, believe it or not. Folks will come across the country border illegally, and then they'll go into tribal lands because there's obviously agreements with the tribal sovereign nations about who can be in there, and for the most part, the state can stay out, but the feds can go in, and unless there's an agreement or cooperation, that's kind of the way that it works. And so, to answer your question, like, it definitely you do see action on the northern border. We've seen a lot bigger uptick in, like, the last, I'd say, 10 years of people coming through, but because there's not any real large cities that are just opposite of our border in Minnesota, it's not nearly as active as you would see, like, in Quebec, or somewhere close to, like, what's the big Vancouver, the larger cities. You don't see that same type of action because it's sparsely populated. So you definitely do see some border action, but yeah.
But isn't it concerning that you guys have, like, large swaths of border that have, like, no border wall, no nothing? And I mean, if it's anything like the southern border with the border patrol, I mean, it's pretty much like one guy for, like, what, 150 miles or
Yeah,
something?
for the sectors. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I'm saying, though, is that the reason why it's different is because on the opposite side of the border, there's not large cities, at least along Minnesota. So if someone could eventually get to crossing into Minnesota, which it does happen, don't get me wrong, it happens, but it's just the amount of open space that they're going to have to travel in Ontario until they actually hit the border. There's nothing. Like, it's like nothing. Like, you might go 200 miles and not run into a gas station, right? Like, it's pretty hardcore. So that's why I think you don't see as big of an emphasis on our border in Minnesota. But again, we do still have Border Patrol presence but we don't have nearly the number of crossings that, again, opposite of like, Niagara and in New York, where they have huge population centers there. Because I think it's something like, I don't know, a third of Canada like basically lives by Montreal or whatever, right? Or in the Montreal greater area is like some absurdly ridiculous number of all of Canada's population is there. That's where most of their border crossings are taking place. By the time you get over to our part of Ontario or even Manitoba, the next closest big city would be like Winnipeg. And they're far enough away that you could see if you had, vans and truckloads of people trying to pull up to get there. If you try and make it by foot, you will die. In the southern border, you die from no water. Northern border, you die because you freeze to death. So, yeah.
Yeah, was it 70% of the Canadian population lives within 30 miles of the U.S. border? I think that's what it is.
Right. Yeah, it's huge, but there's just so many wide open spaces where there just isn't nobody's living there. Like it's just nothingness.
But at least you have trees and water.
Well, depends on the time of year, brother. I mean, you got frozen water for sure, but yeah, I mean, if you ain't bundled up, you're dying from hypothermia.
What is the Chinese presence on the other side of anything on the other side of the border? Because we've seen the Chinese bring people up through the Darien Gap, through vast wide open places, and we know that there are a lot of illegal border crossings happening on the northern border. It's just that we don't hear about it.
Yeah, it's almost hard to imagine. Like, what part of the country do you live in?
Originally from New York, I live in Florida, but I did build wall on the southern border, so I'm not totally.
Gotcha.
I know more than most people.
So the reason I ask that is it's hard to fathom the amount of no people that can exist in an area. So because I've been down the southern border, there's people there's border towns, right? We don't have in Minnesota, there aren't real big border towns. Like they just don't exist because it's just so much wilderness. It's protected, natural, forests and all that type of stuff, right? So all of that is a part of the contemplation of how much border security presence do you need on Minnesota's northern border / the border of the United States with that part of Ontario. It's just not there in this sector. Now there are definitely areas in the Canadian border that have become a huge problem. But I'm just saying, I think it would be shocking to you that you could go to certain parts of the northern border of Minnesota with Canada, and you might go hours without seeing a human soul. You'll be the only human soul that you'll see. And that's what I'm saying is it really is wilderness, man, in large swaths of land. So let's just assume for a second that, there is at least, because I know I've seen the border patrol stations, right, in northern Minnesota. And let's just say that they have some type of, surveillance tech, whether it's, satellite imagery that comes through every once in a while to give them an update on their sector or whatever it might be. You're not going to see very many vehicles. So when you start to see some movement, it's going to pique your interest of oh, okay, what's going on here? So I'm just saying, ultimately, our specific sector of our Canadian border with Minnesota just doesn't have that much activity compared to other parts of the Canadian border, which definitely is a problem. It's been an issue. I think I saw some statistic about the amount of fentanyl that was coming across, which is one of the reasons why Trump did put that tariff out against Canada, in which Trudeau caved relatively quickly on, because the numbers are getting massive coming across the Canadian border, just not necessarily Minnesota.
Yeah. So, but Minnesota still does have a high illegal population. So would that be a lot of them overstaying their visas? Is that the major issue, or
yeah.
them getting flown in, or?
So you got to remember that Interstate 35 goes all the way from Duluth, Minnesota, down all the way through Mexico, right? If for those that used to kind of remember, there was this whole kind of hey, is there this national super highway that they're going to build basically an 8-lane highway, 4 on each side, that goes straight from Mexico to Canada, and that was like, you know, considered a conspiracy. It's like mostly true, maybe not 8 lanes, because there's definitely areas where it's only 2 lanes on each side, so only 4 lanes on each side. But I know I literally knew a guy who was dating this chick, and this dude was here illegally, and he kept getting deported, and he kept on sneaking back, driving up from Texas, because from basically, I'm sorry, I don't know the town, I can't remember it off the top of my head, but to drive from the
Brownsville?
maybe it runs on Interstate 35, but to basically to go from the Mexican American border up to Minneapolis, St. Paul, I want to say it's like 18 hours, right? You can get there in less than a day. So a lot, it's kind of wild to say, but we do have a significant population of people that have come south of Texas that are in the Twin Cities metro area. We even have cartel activity, and they're not coming from Canada though, right? Like they literally are coming up all the way from Texas and getting all the way here. So that happens a lot. But yeah, you're right that we do have a lot of visa overstays as well. That is a significant portion, because the number that they've pegged, that they've talked about, is somewhere between 81 and 88,000 criminal aliens in Minnesota. I sat on a voter panel, whatever, last fall, and we were discussing it, and it's actually really funny because everyone else on the panel is like leftist, and I'm the only guy that's like there representing the Trump perspective. And I encouraged everyone, because the question was, you know, do you have a message to people that might be afraid about President Trump, you know, deporting their friends or family members? And I said, self-deport right now, because Trump's going to win. And it'd be way better for your friends and your family if they just leave on their own recognizance and then try and go back into the legal system. But I say that because that's the number that they kept on throwing out, is somewhere between 80 and 90,000 criminal aliens. I think it's probably higher, but we also do have, when we talk about like, you know, overstays, we do have obviously a lot of rural area that hires these criminal aliens at insane numbers, right? And so people might come here on a temporary work visa, they overstay their visa, and then they're here and they're off, running around doing God knows what. But yeah.
I guess like the more concerning, right? Because like obviously if you cross the border illegally, you've committed a crime and you are now considered like a criminal, right?
Yep, criminal
So,
aliens.
but the major thing is, isn't ISIS's #1 recruiting place in America, Minneapolis area, St. Paul?
So there was like a couple of offshoots of ISIS, but most of it is Al Shabaab, is what it's called, and it's like kind of like an ISIS offshoot based out of Somalia. And they had, again, it was like basically first generation Americans that were, their parents came here as refugees. They actually had legal status, and then it's like their kids that are growing up like, oh, like I don't fit in anywhere. I'm not Somali, but I'm not accepted as an American. So there's a lot of recruiting that's going on from that. But again, like most of that stuff was like online. Like the majority of the radicalization, because like I took a class in college actually back in like 2009, and I took a counterterrorism class, and we had like the one of the guys in the field office in Minneapolis come and talk about, you know, basically how they were going about recruiting and radicalizing young men in the Minneapolis, St. Paul area. But you're right that there was a time in which, like, based off of all of the surveillance that was happening, an insane number of young American-born Somali, if you want to say ethnically Somalian recruits was very, very high, but almost all of it was online. It
Well,
wasn't
I mean,
actually
whether
like
it's taking place online or in person, right? It doesn't really matter. It's the fact that you have radicalized individuals living in like your area, and it seems to be like a hotbed and almost like a safe place for these kinds of things to be occurring. Now, whether that's occurring through the mosques, and the mosques are like acting as a front group and being like, oh no, they're not here, and meanwhile, like they are there, or if it's happening in somebody's house, like that's a huge problem, not only for the people of Minnesota, but for the entire nation as a whole.
Yeah, the thing that's kind of fascinating when you dig into it is what was happening is they were becoming radicalized online. It wasn't even necessarily like any radical mosques that were doing, which happens obviously in other parts of the country, but it was mostly online. And then they were actually booking tickets to go and fly and train in Syria, right, in the Middle East, and then going into Somalia to commit their acts of terrorism. They weren't even committing their acts of terrorism on American soil, which is kind of interesting when you think about those dynamics, that they wouldn't get radicalized and then just decide to commit, acts of terrorism here in the homeland, right?
Yeah, but
They
what
were
about the
literally-
terrorist cells that are operating? Like, I'm not worried about the individual terrorists. I'm worried about the
Yeah.
cells that are operating.
Yeah, and again, I would say based off of again the reports that I've seen in Minneapolis, St. Paul, when you specifically talk about that it was one of the largest places that was recruiting terrorists, they weren't recruiting terrorists that were then staying stateside. They were recruiting terrorists that were then going overseas to commit the terrorism. Still a bad thing, don't get me wrong, but it was such an interesting dynamic. It was, like I said, the social engineering that was happening with Al-Shabaab was like basically to get these young American-born Somalis to go back to a country they've never literally been in to go and fight in their holy war. So that's that kind of.
But you're not worried about like these terrorist cells currently operating in the
Of course,
St. Paul area.
So it's not that I'm not worried about it. It's just it's a different dynamic, right? So like the Al Qaeda that have been in the news a lot, right? Like these terrorists that are entered our country, whether it's to the northern or southern border, that are off operating cells. Those are more or less branches or cells that are more hell bent on creating destruction here in the United States versus the Somalis, for whatever reason. I mean, there's definitely reasons we could talk about, are recruiting and then sending their young men over to go and fight over there. They're not training their folks to stay here. It's like, again, it's not ISIS, it's Al-Shabaab, and it's just a different terrorist cell that does have connections to ISIS, but it's like they have like whatever a different mission, like they want to do the terrorism over there for whatever reason. So I'm concerned about it, but specifically with the Somalis, they haven't shown a propensity to want to create terrorism, at least domestically, at least not yet. That's not what the reports have came that I've read about have been focused on. It's them always going over there and committing acts of terrorism. But they're American citizens, and that's why it's an issue, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't
yeah.
believe.
Go ahead.
I see where you're going, Jennifer, but I don't believe that even Minnesota has had an act of terrorists especially particularly by Somalians, if I'm correct.
Well,
right. Yeah,
I'm
that's what's
not
so weird
worried
about it,
them
man.
committing
That's so weird.
terrorism, right? I know they haven't committed terrorism, but if you have like people who are terrorists who are operating in like kind of like a safe area in the Somalian community, right? Whether they're like committing acts of terror or not, the fact that anything like is being facilitated in this community, because like, yes, they might be recruited to go to Somalia, but that's not 100%. And like, even if they are just getting shipped off to Somalia to like go do their terror over there, right? Like, I just feel like it, like, in more than other cities, right? I feel like it's more prevalent or more out in the open. I don't know. Maybe I'm confused. I'll let it go.
No,
I was honestly just asking questions.
No, you're fine, Jennifer. I appreciate it, but I just want to point out one thing. I mean, we deal with these people on a regular basis. They're virtually harmless. I mean, as far as violence, stuff like that goes on, some of their kids get in trouble, the younger generation. But overall, I don't feel any threat from that community whatsoever. It's really interesting. The only thing that
I'm not saying the Somalis are terrorists, right? That's not what I'm saying, right?
But they have havens.
Havens, and like they can be exploited, right? And like and as we've seen in the Middle East, a lot of these terror networks have come together and are working together where they never really have before because of the threat that they're seeing worldwide against the whole movement, I suppose.
So basically, the dogs and cats are safe in Minnesota for right now.
Yes.
Yeah. And but here's the thing, right? Like I do agree that it is something that we should be aware of and be concerned about in general. And the reason why we should be is because tactics can easily change, right? So like it's this interesting cultural phenomena, and I kind of mentioned it earlier, is that you have these first generation born Somali that they're American, right? Like for all intents and purposes, their parents didn't come here as anchor babies. They maybe came over in like the early 90s, and then maybe in 2000 they had a child. So they're here for 7 years as a refugee, and they had a child, and now their child, because of our birthright citizenship, which I agree we need to 100% change. But now you have this group that now are now having children, and so you're getting this really interesting dynamic of like this Americanization that's happening. And then their biggest pull is to like give them a desire to go and fight for their quote unquote, their motherland. And that's what you're seeing. But yeah, tactics could easily change, right? Like if they could harness that energy and all of a sudden say, well, no, we need to, kill fellow Americans or whatever. That could be a powder keg for sure. But I think,
Well, and also, have you had flights like flown in of other migrants, right? Because we're not just talking about like a homogeneous, like, oh, these are the Somalis, right? Like you've had other people from other nations, like God only knows where, like brought in as part
Yeah.
of this like migrant resettlement kind of thing happening.
yeah. So, I mean, we've had quite a bit of Ukrainians that have came over. We've had not really as many Syrians as you would think. When there was like a big influx of Syrians that were coming here, not a whole lot were coming to Minnesota. Minnesota is really kind of like two largest, or I'd say three largest, like identity groups that are here. We have a huge Hmong population, and they still have folks that are coming from, Laos, Cambodia area. And then obviously we have a lot of Somali population. And then we also do have like a decent Liberian population as well. And those, for whatever reason, we had Bosnians for a while, but a lot of them actually ended up settling in Fargo, North Dakota, which is interesting. And then again, with the ongoing, instability in the Sudan, Somali area, you've actually had some decent populations of Sudanese that have ended up migrating and settling in Minnesota and then in North Dakota as well. But to answer your question, like we're not necessarily getting the same groups that you're seeing from, in other states. We do still have flights coming here for sure, but not nearly as much as you're seeing from other states, which was kind of surprising. Like when you had the governor down in Texas busing people to places, I made a joke post where I was like, send them up to Minnesota because, we're a sanctuary. Minneapolis is a sanctuary city in St. Paul. And people are like, no, don't give them ideas. But it's like, I say as a joke, like they're not sending them up here for some reason. And you definitely have seen a change. Like you'll see like the folks selling fruit out, out of coolers during the summertime. And I'm like, oh, those people are definitely not from the United States. And then you hear them talking and there's homeless encampments and all that different stuff. But yeah, it's such an interesting dynamic. Like I said, it's something that I'm concerned about for sure. Any type of terrorist cells that are recruiting and sending, but it's just Minnesota has its own weird cultural vortex, I guess, that things just happen a little bit differently here than have happened in other places across the country.
Well, I just wanted to take a second and bolster AK's meteorological point. From Duluth to Great Falls along Interstate 94 or US 2, take your pick. The highest temperature I can find is 5 above.
It's cold, man.
Most of the temperatures range from 9 below to to zero. it's
Well, it's a balmy 63 degrees in St. Petersburg, Florida.
it's pretty it's pretty tough up there. It's pretty tough. But they did, Jen, you're right. They did have a serious problem on the northern border, not recently, but back, when you were in high school, there was a major problem smuggling cigarettes, like by the tractor trailer load.
Lucy's.
And
That poor man in Staten Island got murdered over Lucy's.
yeah,
Just saying.
They
Freddie Gray.
they were smuggling cigarettes like there was no tomorrow. I mean, it was just unbelievable. And and the thing about cigarettes is cigarettes provide one of the largest tax bases of any product other than alcohol in our country. It's unbelievable. And
we've got a bunch of degenerates, Chris.
And the worst part about it is that the nicotine by itself,
Leave me out of this.
Nicotine by itself happens to be one of the most useful drugs that we have, because there's one study that was done where nicotine actually repairs damage to the heart. And
there's multiple
Hey,
studies
Chris.
done that nicotine was the most effective thing against COVID.
and
just
it's also good for cognition. And
you could get it from spinach and other folate vegetables as well. You know.
Shut up, Adam.
And there's so much about cognition that I've actually ordered some nicotine patches to see if it will help me remember stuff that I've forgotten.
Wait, you're gonna get on the nicotine now? Yes. I bet you're gonna be so much calmer.
Dude, what are you doing to Mr.
No,
Fisher?
Chris reminds me of the movie Goodfellas.
But
when
we've
Henry
got,
Hill.
Okay, hold on.
We've got friendly neighborhood Republican whose arm is gonna fall off if we don't call on her.
That's what I was literally trying to do. Friendly, go ahead.
Hey, I came in kind of late, so you might have covered this already, and it's not about what we've been talking about so far here, but about what's going on in the legislature here. I'm looking at what the Democrats are saying about the special election for Brad Tabke's seat. They seem very, very confident, like super confident that they are going to win that special election. And I don't know if it's because of just bluster and propaganda, or if it's because we have really not the greatest security around elections in Minnesota, or what it is. But does anyone have an opinion about what if there's a chance on Republicans getting that seat so that we can get something done in the legislature?
I can give my opinion. So a couple of different things. So the Brad Tabke race was already ruled on. That's 54A down the Shakopee area by a judge that said that election did stand. And at that point, the Republican challenger, Aaron Paul, dropped his lawsuit. And so it's kind of right now in like this like question mark gray area about what do we do? And it's turned into like this bargaining chip. And so the state legislature, initially the House Republican caucus was saying that they were not going to seat Brad Tabke because of all of the election irregularities and the fact that he won by 14 votes when 21 ballots were destroyed, but one of them was like a duplicate or whatever, but 20 actual votes were destroyed in a race decided by 14. But that issue, basically from a judicial standpoint, is kind of like in a pause pattern because a judge already ruled that Tabke did win that election. Now, the thing that Democrats are so confident about is that there's another race in House District 40B in which the Democrat that quote unquote won, Curtis Johnson, was found to not have legally lived in the district that he ran and won for. So therefore, that seat became vacated. Now, that district has been a plus like 18 district. So Democrats typically get somewhere around 58, 60% of the vote in that district. That's why they're so confident that they're going to slam dunk win that district. But special elections are weird. And with all of the news being about Democrats, holding out, I think that there was some hesitancy from the Democrats, but they were operating under the premise that the reason Republicans should quote unquote share power is because it was a done deal. We're going to win that special election. And that was kind of the arrogance that they were putting out there, like they owned the seat, that Republicans could never win that seat. Now, after redistricting, they did redistrict it to make it even more Democrat than it was previously. But ultimately, that's why Democrats are, quote unquote, so confident about it. It's because it's a district that Republicans haven't been actually super competitive in. But we have seen stranger things happen across this country. We've seen districts that can flip like that in a special election because you have a significantly lower turnout. And so Republicans are, optimistic about what could potentially happen in that race. The guy that lost that election, Paul Wickstrom, he is running again, and the Democrats have now endorsed a younger, progressive, up-and-comer guy that claims to have already known that Curtis Johnson didn't live in the district. So that's interesting wrinkle in and of itself. But yeah, that's just kind of setting everything as it is. Democrats are just very confident based off of the past handful of election cycles, and especially the way that the redistricting happened, is that they'll be able to easily win that special election. And Republicans are trying to do everything in their power to challenge it. And so if you're listening or watching this and you have a few, bucks to spare, consider contributing to Paul Wickstrom's campaign. And let's give them the fight of their life, because if we can pick up that seat, then we'll have the number 68, and we'll actually have not only a organizational majority, but we'll have a quorum majority, and then we can basically do everything in our power. We're not going to pass anything. Like, of course, we have to pass a budget, and that is going to give us a significant amount of heartburn for people that are paying attention, because the Democrats in the Senate are basically going to poo-poo everything that Republicans trying to do, that are going to cut the size, scope, and function of government. And then they're going to try and push us into this whole government shutdown, and then pointing their fingers at Republicans if Republicans don't capitulate on funding things that we should not be funding, because we did blow through an $18 billion with a B dollar surplus just 2 years ago. So that's kind of the landscape of the way that things are right now with the special election. Officially today, the writ was signed by Governor Walz. It's going to be March 11th when that special election takes place in 40B. The question about what happens next with Tabke is going to be wholly dependent on the committee and hearings that are going to happen, that the Republicans, that was part of the concession that they get to have this committee. The other part of that was that based off of the results of that investigation, that they would not be able to unseat Tabke, and that's been a little bit of an issue for some people. But really, the reason why that concession was made is that most likely, unless Aaron Paul or people from that district of Brad Tabke in 54A decide, under the new evidence that is found from the results of this, basically committee opening up into what happened in 54A with Tabke and the destruction of those 20 ballots, I don't think that a judge would actually side with Republicans unseating Tabke. So even if we get all the great information that comes out of there, and it's like pure point blank shenanigans, this should be a redo, and Republicans say we're going to unseat Tabke, I think that based off of the earlier judge's ruling, he would say, too bad, we already ruled that Tabke's good. So a new lawsuit's going to have to be brought, in my honest estimation, and this is why Republicans conceded the point. But I could be wrong. Just my opinion.
Thanks for clearing that up. There's a lot there, and I think that.
I know. I'm
No,
sorry. There's
no,
so
no.
much.
Thank
Lisa,
you. 'Cause
Lisa
it's
Space
so
is recorded.
confusing
You can go
trying
back
to
and
look
listen to it.
into it and trying to get the information. And I think that people are going to be highly motivated on both sides, special election or not. It might help a little bit that Walls isn't on the national ballot in this election now, so maybe turnout might be a little lower. But it's important. That one, the tab key one, it's just so reminiscent of the Coleman Franken thing that I don't have any hope really on that one. So, but thanks for clearing it up. I appreciate that.
I think
Yeah,
that
you're
they
welcome.
should distribute tampons in that district.
That will get them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how you win the vote.
Well, speaking of tampons and Governor Spirit Fingers, during COVID, apparently, wasn't there something like, I don't know, like $20 billion or $380 million that went missing under Governor Waltz that was supposed to go to give students or children like lunches and dinner or food during COVID, but actually just went into the pockets of him and his friends, and they went out and bought Teslas and vacation homes and stuff like that. Like, what is happening with that, and how are you guys going to hold Governor Waltz accountable for this money that has disappeared on his watch?
Well, I'll let someone else go first. But yeah, I have some deep thoughts on this too.
All right, perfect. I don't know, Adam. Do you want to? Justin, are you in Minnesota?
Yes, I am.
Okay, go ahead. Adam, hold on a
I
second.
kind of wanted to bring it back to that Somali conversation that we were having. And I really appreciate AK and his getting to the community and talking to them and all the things and experiences he shared. I wanted to share my experience. I was born and raised in Minneapolis, and so I've seen the change personally. But I want to I did some research back on this before. Basically, somewhere between, we had about 17 to 25,000 Somali refugees that the actual Minnesota people voted on accepting in here. And that was in the early 90s, and in the early 2000s, a few more came in. But it's funny because the numbers I'm looking up here on Grok still kind of say right around 17 to 20,000 refugees that we took in. But we have somewhere around 125,000 to maybe even 150,000 Somali community here now. And what that has done to the city, obviously changed the demographics quite a bit. But some other places, like a place called Seven Corners, we call it. It used to be a really cool, like, festival area. They used to have like kind of like hippies things and marketplaces, and it was a place for music. We had all kinds of music festivals in this area. Well, that was kind of an area where they started to settle, and that whole area has completely changed. All the music venues there have changed quite a bit. But the crime's gone up, and the Somali gangs are starting to get pretty wild. The youth are kind of joining into the American culture of gangs, which is also very interesting. But when you talk about a city with 360,000 residents, pretty much consistently through my lifetime, and now we've added, 150, possibly 150,000 Somalis into the community, it has really changed everything. I mean, we've even got Minneapolis has approved the Muslim call to prayer that they can blast off of their the rooftops of their mosques. So that's also caused a dynamic in the city. And so my concern is I talked to a general one time for about 4 hours, and it was one of the most wonderful conversations about this subject. And this general worked as a civil affairs unit in Iraq during the and Afghanistan. And his job was to take a whole convoy and go to all the little villages that weren't really affected by the war and really spread goodwill from American people. The first thing they would do would deworm their cattle. They would, give shots to antibiotics and medicines to the children and stuff like that. and they were trying to show that, trying to show some goodwill that Americans are good people. And during that time, he said, they would just get, like, the kids would run to them when they came out of their Humvees, and they would just take everything out of their pockets. They would just steal everything because it was legal for them to do that. So these are some of the cultural things that have been kind of interesting, because from this general, his job was to study all 3 books of the Quran. And so he really kind of explained a lot more to me about some of the studies I've done. But the problem we're having and what I'm witnessing is that the community does not want to assimilate to American culture. And that is the problem we're going to have. And I've been trying to figure out how this is going to play out in Minneapolis. I see the change, and I'm here, and I'm one of the new leaders in the Republican Party, and I'm fighting to hopefully get some of this very progressive stuff back in line. And I'm going to stay here and fight as long as I can. But I got to tell you, a lot of Republicans and people like myself, I'm a small business owner, we're fighting to stay here. That's what we're fighting for, because I've got property I bought in Florida. I still have to build a home. But I mean, my wife and I were talking today. If we don't win this in 2026 in Minneapolis or Minnesota in general and take over, at least I think we need the Senate and the Republican or the legislature at this point in order to change anything. But I'm kind of getting a little bit more into the political aspect. But I really want to touch on that Somalian stuff, because I know, like I say, I really appreciate AK's expertise in it as well, because I know he's actually going to the community and talking to these folks. And I'm wondering if on the assimilation part and the cultural differences that we do have from the Western culture to the Muslim culture, what do you think is the end game on this? And I'll listen. Thank you.
So
let me just hey, mute your mic, Jeff. Mute your mic, raise your hand. We got Adam up next, but I just wanted to real quick jump in here and just in the Somalian community is really tough to understand when you start talking to the folks there, because they're tribal. There's a lot of tribes, and to get the imams, I mean, to get the Somali community as voters, you have to go for their imams. Well, their imams are real tribal as well. So it's it's more complicated than you think. When I've been on campaigns, it's always the question always is how are we going to get into the Somalian community? Well, I just don't think that it's the dynamics are so ridiculously complicated that I don't even know sometimes. I mean, you don't want to forget about them. You don't want to avoid them or ignore them. You absolutely want to go say hi and speak to them and be in their community. But to put the effort in that's required to win a group of people like that, it's just astronomical. And I don't know that it's honestly worth the time. Hey, Adam, what's up, man?
What's up, man? Doing well. Actually, no, I'm not doing well. I got a bad headache and neck pain, but I'll cope and see about it. AK is no longer up here, and he mentioned like a Bosnian community near him. I'm 3/4 Bosnian, and I was just gonna tell him, go by there and pay them a visit and get some smoked meats. They make a good pasturma, which is pastrami, and a sujuk, which is like smoked sausage. Excellent stuff. And I'll yield with that.
Hell yeah, Adam. I just want to make peace.
Jeff, I'm sorry. Are you a co-host? Just wondering. Yep. Thank you very much. All right. No quarter. Run it.
Oh, sorry about that. I was texting. Apparently, I got to get. How long do you want to keep this open, Kimberly? How are you folks doing here?
Well, we've got Black Ops that's starting right now. So
yeah, that's what I kind of
Black
thought.
Ops is canceled tonight.
Yes.
Oh. All right. Well, yeah, I don't.
Kim, we have that
Yeah.
call though.
I was gonna wrap it up here in just a minute because I've got work and we've got the call. So let's go to Jeff and then we'll go to Justin.
Do we say prayers for Mr. 30 below? As
Yes.
well?
What's going on?
He's sick.
Oh,
We'll leave
okay.
it at that.
All right. Well, we'll put him in our prayer. Go ahead, Jeff, and then we'll go to Justin. Oh, Jeff's gone. Go ahead, Justin.
Oh, thank you guys. I think I actually just forgot our last point. I know you're wrapping up. I'll just do a shameless plug. I'm actually doing some spaces once weekly on DEI and how it's going to affect our schools. And we got some real good experts on that. So if you guys want to, follow me, it would be a great session. We've got people from Child Protection League that are doing these with me. And we're really diving into, we want to teach people firstly how all the DEI has become the socialist revolution. I probably don't have to teach you guys this stuff. But we're really trying to get into the executive orders and how we can trickle them down to the state and how we can fund the local school district. So anyway, I'll leave it at that. And thanks for the space. It's been great.
Well, and Justin, are you familiar with Courage is a Habit and Jennifer McWilliams?
A little bit.
Because they definitely are people that you'll want to tap into because they've got their finger on the pulse of that. So I highly recommend, reaching out to them as well.
Okay, that was Jennifer Williams.
Jennifer McWilliams, and Courage is a Habit.
So much of,
so much of what Jennifer Williams has gotten her information and where she's gotten her footing was through Child Protection League.
Beautiful.
So there's a connection there already that I was very excited to find out about with Julie Quist and all of those folks. Look them up. Look up Courage is a Habit and Jennifer McWilliams and put them in your and make sure you follow them.
I will definitely do that. I appreciate that. Thank you guys.
Great. And when is your space, you said, or have you not?
We're doing them on Wednesday nights. We just had our first one last night. And so we're just trying to build our audience. But I know Michelle Lentz and Julie Quist want to get their message out. I ran for school board, which actually started my journey into this. So yeah, we're really kind of uncovering a lot of great stuff. As you know, that's a great group. So they've got a wealth of knowledge.
Absolutely. Well, appreciate it. And we'll definitely have to check it out next Wednesday. All right, guys.
Thank you.
Appreciate everybody coming up. No quarter. Always a pleasure. Thank you for co-hosting. Jen, I love you. Hope everybody has a wonderful rest of their evening and a great weekend. See you in space.